Good evening, friends. Settle in now. If you haven't already, dim your lights. Let the shadows grow soft in your room, and tuck yourself beneath your blanket, as if you are wrapping yourself in a cocoon of quiet warmth. Maybe you hear the faint hum of your surroundings, your fan turning, the creak of your bed frame, or even just the slow rhythm of your own breath. All of it is welcome here. Tonight, I'll take you somewhere far away, yet close enough to drift into with ease. We're heading into the odd, surprisingly fragrant, and sometimes slightly ridiculous world of 17th century French perfumes. Yes, perfumes, not kings, not wars, not revolutions, though those things lurk in the background. Instead, we'll walk through a time when a spritz, or rather a dab, of perfume wasn't just about smelling nice. It was about fashion, medicine, even social survival. Imagine living in a world where water wasn't trusted, where soap was scarce, and yet everyone wanted to smell delightful, or at least not unbearable. If this calm journey helps you unwind, you can always tap like or subscribe, but only if it feels right, and only after you're well and truly drifting. For now, let your body relax. Shoulders melt into your pillow, hands resting loosely. Maybe your toes wiggle once before falling still. And with that, let me tell you a story. Chapter 1. The perfumed dawn of France. Picture Paris in the early 1600s. The streets are narrow, the houses leaning toward each other like gossiping neighbors. There's the clatter of wooden wheels on cobblestones, the call of vendors selling roasted chestnuts, fresh bread, and sometimes less appealing wares. And floating above it all, or trying to, are clouds of perfume. Perfume in this era wasn't quite what you'd find at a department store. There were no neat glass bottles with elegant sprays. Instead, fragrances were often made with animal fats, flower oils, resins, and spices crushed and distilled through careful, sometimes messy processes. Perfume was worked into pomanders, little balls of scented wax or resin that people carried like talismans. They were thought to guard against disease, because remember, the miasma theory, that sickness floated in foul air, was in full swing. Imagine carrying around a tiny ball of perfume, tucked in a locket at your chest, believing that as long as the scent was strong, illness would not dare to touch you. It was both science and superstition, mingling like the notes of clove and rose. And there were perfumed gloves, too. Oh yes, gloves were the height of luxury. A nobleman or noblewoman might receive a pair of leather gloves scented with ambergris, civet, or lavender. Picture slipping your hand into soft kid leather, the lining releasing a warm, musky sweetness each time you moved your fingers. Practical, yes. Stylish, absolutely. But also a way to hide the less delightful sense of everyday life when bathing was rare. Can you imagine? Today we might throw on deodorant without a second thought, but in the 17th century, a perfumed glove was practically the equivalent of a shower. Like sliding your hand into a portable bath cloud, though far more expensive. I like to imagine the shops that specialized in these scents. Small, dim rooms along the bridges of Paris or the lanes of Versailles. Glass jars filled with rose petals, sandalwood, myrrh. A copper still hissing quietly in the corner, steam curling up as drops of scented oil plink into a waiting vessel. The air heavy with layers, sweet orange peel fighting with bitter galbanum, honey tones warming beneath sharp vinegar-like notes. A confusing orchestra of smells, but one that wealthy clients found irresistible. Now, don't worry, we're not going to be tested on these details. This is all for the sheer joy of drifting. Still, it's fun to imagine. What would you have chosen? Would you reach for rose, the eternal classic? Or maybe something rarer, like jasmine, which had to be imported and was prized as exotic? Some even adored the strange, sharp scent of civet, taken from a little gland of a civet cat. To us, it might smell a bit like sweaty musk, but back then, it was the Chanel No. 5 of its day. Funny, isn't it? How something we might wrinkle our noses at today was once a hallmark of sophistication. Like offering someone a medieval Pop-Tart, strange to us, but once an absolute delight. The perfumes weren't just about attraction or elegance, though. They were woven into the rhythm of life. At Versailles, Louis XIII and later Louis XIV, the famous Sun King, adored perfumes. Louis XIV, in particular, was sometimes called the sweetest-smelling monarch in Europe. He was so obsessed that his rooms were regularly sprayed with fresh scents, his clothing infused, his gloves dipped. At one point, even the fountains of Versailles ran with perfume during festivals. Imagine standing near a marble fountain as rosewater spilled down instead of plain water, the air filling with sweetness while music played and candles flickered. It must have felt like stepping into a dream. And yet, under all that beauty, there was always practicality. Perfume as a mask for poor sanitation, for the fear of illness, and for the everyday realities of crowded, bustling life. Perfume was both a shield and a stage curtain. As you think of this, maybe let your breath deepen just a little. Inhale, exhale. Imagine drawing in the warm, floral air of 17th century France, though thankfully, without the less appealing smells lurking behind. The people of that world were living in a paradox. Surrounded by both beauty and discomfort, they sought little luxuries that gave them comfort. Perfume wasn't just luxury, it was reassurance. Perhaps that's why the stories of perfumes linger. They were part of daily survival. And so, as we close this first part, let your mind rest with that thought. A world of carriages and candlelight, of powdered wigs and perfumed gloves, where fragrance was both armor and art. Now, let's drift a little further, deeper into this strange, scented world, where each turn of the story carries us closer to dream. Now that we've taken our first step into the scented streets and gilded halls of France, let us wander a little deeper. Imagine yourself strolling slowly, your shoes tapping lightly on uneven stones, the night cool but fragrant, and the sky overhead a velvet curtain pierced with faint stars. Paris, in the early 1600s, was alive with aromas, some delightful, some less so. The perfume merchants tried, valiantly, to push back the tide of smells that came from crowded neighborhoods, narrow alleys, and the lack of reliable plumbing. When I picture it, I like to imagine the perfumer's shop as a kind of sanctuary. Step in through a wooden door and you leave behind the fish markets and horse dung, the wool dyers' acrid vats, and the tanneries with their sharp bite of leather and lime. Instead, you enter a pocket of sweet reprieve. Inside, the perfumer is more than a merchant. They are an alchemist, a confidant, even a kind of magician. Bottles of orange blossom water stand beside small jars of ground nutmeg. Dried rose petals are piled in silk sacks, waiting to be infused into oils. A polished mortar and pestle sits on the counter, ready to grind spices into fine powders that can be mixed into pomanders or dusted into wigs. Can you hear it? The soft, steady sound of grinding, like a heartbeat of the trade. Perfume recipes were often guarded secrets, passed from one artisan to the next, carefully protected like treasure maps. And treasure they were. A well-crafted perfume could elevate a perfumer into royal circles, even win them a place at court. One recipe might call for cloves from the East Indies, another for ambergris washed ashore from a whale. Each ingredient traveled across oceans and deserts, carried by ships and caravans, until finally it reached the cobbled streets of Paris, where it was transformed into invisible clouds of status and style. What fascinates me most is how these perfumes were layered into everyday life. Not just as scents to dab behind the ear, but woven into fabrics, worked into powders, stitched into gloves. Imagine sitting at a long oak table at supper, candles flickering, the roasted meat steaming, the bread still warm, and around you, the mingling fragrances of those seated nearby. Rosemary from a sleeve, violet essence from a ribbon, musk from a perfumed glove. The table itself must have been a dizzying blend, like walking through a modern perfume department, but dimly lit and punctuated by the clinking of goblets. Sometimes, I wonder, did the perfumes actually smell good to them, or was it simply what they knew? Civet, with its animal sharpness, was adored. Musk, taken from musk deer, was seen as almost heavenly. To us, both might feel a little overwhelming. But in a world where fresh laundry was a rarity and soap could be harsh and scarce, these musky, spicy, and floral blends must have felt like stepping into sunlight. And there was status in the very rarity of it. A nobleman perfumed with imported jasmine was sending a signal. I have wealth, I have access, I have connections that span the globe. Just as today a rare watch or designer brand might whisper prestige, back then, a whiff of something exotic was enough to make people turn their heads. One story I love comes from the court of Catherine de' Medici, who a century earlier had helped popularize perfumed gloves in France. She brought her personal perfumer, René Le Florentine, with her when she married into French royalty. His skill and recipes became famous, and by the 17th century, his influence still lingered. Some even whispered that perfumes carried hidden poisons, and perfumers, with their mysterious distillations, might be just as dangerous as they were delightful. Perfume, after all, was chemistry in its infancy. A little smoke, a little magic, a little mystery. Now, picture yourself at Versailles in the 1660s. Louis XIV, the Sun King, reigns supreme. His love of perfume is legendary. Every day, he surrounds himself with scents. His gloves, his clothing, even his bed linens are perfumed. His courtiers, eager to please, follow suit. Walking into the Hall of Mirrors must have been a dazzling experience, not only visually, with glass, gold, and candlelight shimmering everywhere, but olfactorily, too. Imagine waves of scent rolling through the hall, orange blossom water spritzed into the air, lavender sachets tucked discreetly into garments, the soft exhale of rose powder as someone shifts their wig. Perfume was more than fashion here. It was court politics. To be scented properly, to smell appropriately luxurious, was part of maintaining your position in the intricate hierarchy of Versailles. Imagine the anxiety of arriving underperfumed, or worse, wearing a scent that someone powerful disliked. In such a delicate dance of etiquette, even fragrance became a language. I think of it like this. Imagine attending a modern dinner party where every guest must bring a dish. You wouldn't dare bring something sloppy or uninspired, right? At Versailles, your dish was your scent, how you carried it, how it mingled with others, how it complemented the mood of the evening. A whiff too strong, and you risked mockery. Too faint, and you might seem careless. Perfectly balanced, and you could glide smoothly into the Sun King's favor. Even the gardens were scented deliberately. Versailles was designed to overwhelm, to impress at every turn. Fountains, pathways, groves, all arranged not just for the eye, but for the nose. Orange trees were planted in abundance, their blossoms releasing sweetness into the summer air. It was as though Louis XIV wanted his entire court to live inside a perfume bottle, forever surrounded by carefully curated notes. As I describe this, maybe you can let yourself sink a little deeper into your pillow, imagining the slow rustle of silk gowns brushing across polished floors, the quiet murmur of courtiers speaking in hushed tones, and beneath it all, the steady hum of scents layered like music. Perfume was escape. Escape from the staleness of crowded cities, escape from the fear of disease, escape into luxury and illusion. And yet, it was also everyday survival, a mask against the unpleasant, a comfort against the unknown. So as we drift at the close of this part, let's hold that image. Paris and Versailles, alive with both candlelight and clove, both rosewater and musk. A world where every breath was a performance, and every scent told a story. And as you rest here, think of how fragrance lingers, subtle, unseen, but powerful, shaping memory and mood. The 17th century French knew this well, and soon, we'll wander even further into their fragrant world, with tales stranger and sweeter than you might imagine. Imagine, for a moment, a candlelit chamber in the French countryside. The air is cool, the night outside hushed except for the distant call of an owl. Inside, a noble woman sits at her vanity, her gown loosened, her wig resting on a stand beside her. On the table before her are small jars, delicate bottles, and little embroidered sachets. Each holds a fragment of the fragrant world that defined her day. She reaches for a small box of powdered orris root, ground from the rhizome of the iris flower, prized for its violet-like sweetness. She dusts a little onto her skin, letting it mingle with the musk already dabbed on her gloves. The scents layer together like strokes of paint on a canvas. Soft, floral, warm. She sighs, perhaps, not because she needs to smell pleasant for anyone else, but because the perfume itself brings her comfort. A private luxury. A way of saying, here, in this moment, I am wrapped in beauty. Perfume in the 17th century had this dual quality. It was public and performative, meant to impress, seduce, or even intimidate, but it was also private, a kind of whispered ritual that turned ordinary routines into something luminous. Much like how today, a single sip of tea before bed can become a small ceremony, grounding and soothing. Perfumed sachets were especially common in the home. Small linen or silk bags filled with lavender, rosemary, dried rose petals, or sweet marjoram. They were tucked into wardrobes to scent clothing, slipped between sheets to freshen bedding, or even carried in pockets as portable charms. In a time when laundry was not as frequent as ours, these sachets were little miracles. They turned a plain chest of linens into a garden in bloom. There's something calming in that thought, isn't there? That even centuries ago, people sought the same quiet comforts we do, to soften their surroundings, to make sleep sweeter, to carry a fragment of nature with them in the folds of fabric. But perfume could also be culinary. Spices and herbs that flavored the kitchen often doubled in the perfumer's toolkit. Imagine a roast spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, followed by a cordial of rose water, and then stepping into a salon where those very same notes floated in the air, not from food, but from powders and oils. The line between eating a flavor and wearing it was blurry. One might sip on orange blossom water at supper, then later dab a drop on the wrist before a dance. It was all part of the same fragrant continuum. This blending of senses fascinates me. Imagine the way your memory works, how the smell of vanilla might remind you of a birthday cake, or lavender might conjure up a grandmother's garden. In 17th century France, the overlap between scent, taste, and memory was constant. Dinner and dance, kitchen and chamber overlapped in perfumes that told stories beyond words. And then there were pomanders, those little scented orbs that dangled from belts or chains. Crafted from amber, resin, beeswax, or even silver filigree, they held strong-smelling herbs like rosemary, thyme, or clove. These weren't just fashion, they were armor. Many believed that foul smells carried illness, so a pomander wasn't only a pleasant accessory, it was a shield. Walking through crowded Paris, a noble might lift their pomander closer to the nose, breathing in the cloves while passing a butcher's stall or a crowded alley. It was a silent ritual of self-defense. Think of it like carrying hand sanitizer today, except instead of a small plastic bottle, you had a silver orb filled with crushed herbs, dangling like jewelry. More stylish, perhaps, but with the same anxious comfort behind it. There's something almost endearing about the confidence they placed in these fragrant little charms. They believed the world could be tamed, or at least softened, by scent. That if you carried enough rosemary, the plague might pass you by. And who could blame them? When medicine faltered and explanations were scarce, perfume offered hope in a bottle, in a glove, in a sachet. And speaking of gloves, they deserve a pause here. The craze for perfumed gloves was so intense that entire guilds were formed, perfumers and glovers working hand in hand, sometimes literally. The leather itself was tanned with strong-smelling substances, and to mask that sharpness, it was soaked in perfume mixtures of jasmine, musk, ambergris, or violet. Imagine slipping your hand into a glove that carried the memory of flowers, spice, and sea all at once. Each gesture released a subtle cloud, like a secret whispered into the air. One record from the 1600s describes gloves scented with a blend of civet, orange blossom, and rose, a rich, almost dizzying combination. Another favored ambergris, a waxy substance from the bellies of whales, which to us might sound strange, but to them was considered the height of refinement. Ambergris has an odd, sweet, earthy musk, and it helped fix scents so they lasted longer. A noble could wear perfumed gloves and, hours later, still leave a faint trail behind them. I wonder, if you close your eyes, can you almost picture it? A candlelit ballroom, music drifting in from violins, skirts swishing as dancers move, and every twirl releasing a breath of perfumed air from gloves, gowns, and powdered wigs. The entire hall swirling not just with movement, but with invisible layers of fragrance. A perfume symphony, unfolding silently above the chatter and the steps. It must have been both enchanting and overwhelming. Too many notes at once, too many musk and flower and spice. But perhaps, in the rhythm of it, there was comfort. After all, when the air outside smelled of mud, refuse, and crowded humanity, the court offered an escape. A carefully perfumed illusion, as fragile as it was intoxicating. And here, as you listen now, let yourself imagine that escape. Feel the hush of silk across a floor, the flutter of candlelight, the faint press of lavender sachets tucked into linens. A world half real, half dream, suspended between necessity and fantasy. Perfume, in the 17th century, was never just perfume. It was medicine, luxury, art, and hope. 1,000 roles in a single invisible form. And with that thought, let your mind rest gently as we drift further into this strange and scented world. The night is still young in our story, and many more fragrant paths lie ahead. Now, let us wander away from the bustling courts and the candlelit ballrooms and slip into the quieter corners of France, into the workshops, the markets, and the small streets where perfume was made, traded, and imagined. In the south of France, nestled near the mountains and the sea, was a town that would become legendary, Grasse. Even in the 17th century, Grasse was beginning its long journey toward being the perfume capital of the world. Its hillsides, bathed in sunlight, were ideal for cultivating flowers. Jasmine vines tangled against walls, roses opened in the early light, orange blossoms drifted with sweetness on the breeze. The fields themselves were like living perfumes, each season bringing waves of fragrance. The story of Grasse begins not with perfume, but with leather. The town had been known for its tanneries, workshops where animal hides were processed into leather. But tanning was a stinky business. The hides were soaked, scraped, treated with pungent substances like urine and lime, and the smell was impossible to mask. Buyers complained. And so, clever artisans began scenting their leather goods, gloves, belts, shoes, with perfumes to cover the odor. The perfumed glove trade blossomed, and soon, perfume became more important than the leather itself. Imagine a pair of gloves scented with rosewater and clove, shipped from Grasse to Paris, to slip onto the hands of some noble at court. With each gesture, the scent of the South floated into the glittering halls of Versailles. The connection between countryside and court was invisible, but powerful. From the blooms of Grasse to the throne of the Sun King, perfume traveled as quietly as a dream. The methods of extracting fragrance were delicate and time-consuming. One common technique was distillation. Imagine a copper still, glowing gently from the heat of a fire. Into it went rose petals or orange blossoms, steeped in water. As the mixture heated, fragrant steam rose, curling upward, until it condensed into a fine trickle of perfumed water. It was slow work, requiring patience and a careful hand, but the result was liquid magic. Rose water, orange blossom water, lavender water, each carrying the essence of a flower in liquid form. Another method was enfleurage, a more romantic but painstaking process. Fat, animal fat, usually, was spread across glass trays, and fresh flowers were pressed into it. Day after day, the blossoms were replaced, until the fat became saturated with fragrance. This perfumed fat could then be washed with alcohol to extract pure oils. Imagine the devotion required, placing petal after petal, waiting as the scent slowly, stubbornly, seeped in. It was a dance of patience, as if coaxing the very spirit of the flower to move into a new home. In a way, that's what perfume always was in this era, the attempt to capture the fleeting. Flowers bloom and wither, spices fade, but perfume could hold them longer, suspend them in time. A bottle of rose water could keep summer alive through the chill of winter. A perfumed glove could carry the memory of a garden into a ballroom. It was a kind of immortality, bottled and worn. And of course, it wasn't only nobles who enjoyed perfumes. Apothecaries, those early pharmacists, sold perfumed waters alongside remedies. Orange blossom water might be prescribed for indigestion, rose water for headaches. Lavender water was thought to soothe nerves. Perfume was medicine as much as pleasure, folded into the daily rituals of care. Picture a small shop, shelves lined with jars. On one shelf, ground cinnamon bark. On another, dried rosemary sprigs. Small vials of perfumed oils sit beside bottles of tinctures. A customer might enter complaining of sleeplessness, and the apothecary might recommend lavender water, instructing them to dab it on their temples or sip a spoonful. In this way, perfume and healing were intertwined. It's comforting to think of that, isn't it? That even centuries ago, people used scents to ease their minds, to soften their nights. Just as we might burn a candle or diffuse lavender oil today, a weary Parisian in the 1600s might rest with rosewater nearby, trusting it to bring calm dreams. But perfumes weren't always sweet. Some recipes leaned heavily on spices and resins, giving strong, smoky notes. Myrrh, frankincense, benzoin, these added depth and mystery. Others embraced the animalic: musk from deer, civet from cats, castoreum from beavers. These scents were earthy, musky, sometimes shocking, yet they anchored perfumes and made them last. It was the contrast, the play between floral delicacy and raw animal power, that gave 17th century perfumes their strange allure. Can you imagine what it would be like to walk through a market where these ingredients were sold? Bales of dried lavender tied with twine, crates of oranges spilling their zest into the air, jars of sticky resins that smelled smoky and sweet. And then, tucked in a corner, a tiny vial of civet paste, sharp and musky. The air itself would be dizzying, both pleasant and overwhelming. The perfumers worked like composers, blending these notes into harmonies. Too much clove, and the scent became medicinal. Too much musk, and it turned heavy. But balanced just so, rose against musk, lavender against ambergris. It became irresistible. Invisible art, lingering in the air long after its maker was gone. And in this balance, there was always a hint of mystery. Perfume was invisible, intangible, yet it had the power to command attention, to stir memory, to enchant. A noble woman entering a room might say nothing at all, but her perfume spoke for her, a message of elegance, of luxury, of power. Perhaps that's why kings and queens adored perfumes so deeply. They understood that fragrance was as much a performance as a speech, as much a weapon as a sword. The right perfume could dazzle, soothe, or intimidate. It was diplomacy in a bottle, swirled onto gloves, brushed into hair, sprinkled onto rooms. And so, as we linger in this moment, imagine the soft hum of a copper still, the rustle of flower fields in grass, the hush of an apothecary's shop. The air around you rich with scents, old and new, layered into a tapestry of survival and desire. Perfume, born from flowers and resins, from patience and imagination, drifting through the centuries to reach us even now. Breathe gently, and let that invisible tapestry wrap around you as we move closer toward the heart of this perfumed world. Let us linger now, in these closing moments of our first chapter, and step gently into the private, nightly rituals that perfume inspired. The 17th century may feel distant, but if you lean in, you'll find familiar echoes, small gestures of comfort, nightly habits, little ways to soften the edge of the world before sleep. Imagine a noble household preparing for bed. The great halls fall quiet. Servants move softly with candles, their flames wobbling as they pass through drafty corridors. In the chambers above, tapestries sway faintly against stone walls. The air cools, carrying the hush of evening. On the dressing table, a small bowl of rosewater waits. The lady of the house dips a linen cloth, wrings it gently, and wipes her face, not so much to clean, but to refresh, to carry the soft, familiar scent of roses into her dreams. Nearby, a sachet of lavender lies between the pillows. She knows the scent may calm her nerves, may bring rest, though she cannot say why. It is simply tradition, whispered through generations. Perfume here is intimate. It's not for display, not for court, not for the gaze of others. It is a secret comfort, a whisper carried only for the one who breathes it in. There's something timeless in that, a reminder that even centuries ago, people sought the same soothing rhythms we crave today. Men had their rituals, too. A gentleman might dip a handkerchief in orange blossom water and keep it near, inhaling gently before sleep. Some sprinkled rosewater on their bedsheets, believing it purified not only the fabric but also the air. Others wore perfumed amulets, convinced they guarded against illness in the night. Perfume was both medicine and lullaby, wrapped together in a single invisible thread. What's striking is how much faith was placed in these scents. In a world where science was still finding its footing, perfume filled the gaps. Could lavender really ease headaches? Could rosemary protect against plague? No one truly knew, But belief was powerful, and scent carried that belief with every breath. And so, the perfumed night unfolded, each home its own little sanctuary. Some chambers filled with the heavy musk of civet, others with the delicate powder of iris, still others with the resinous hum of frankincense curling from a burner. A patchwork of scents across France, each one personal, each one deeply human. Now, let us step out of the chambers and back into the broader world, just for a moment, to the great festivals of Versailles, where perfume reached its most theatrical heights. Imagine the Sun King himself, Louis XIV, presiding over a celebration. The gardens lit with hundreds of flickering candles, their glow reflected in still pools of water, music drifting in the air, and then, the fountains themselves releasing perfumed water, rose or orange blossoms spilling into the night, misting guests with sweetness. It must have felt like walking inside a dream, the world turned briefly magical by scent alone. Of course, behind this grandeur was always the more ordinary truth, that perfume masked what could not be cleaned, soothed what could not be cured, and softened what could not be avoided. But even if the reasons were practical, the results were enchanting. In every spray, every sachet, every perfumed glove, there was a touch of fantasy. And perhaps that is why this history still matters. Not because the recipes or the ingredients are strange, though they are, but because the longing they reveal is so familiar. The longing to be comforted, to be surrounded by beauty, to find peace in the invisible. As you lie here now, listening, perhaps you feel that echo. The way a favorite candle softens your evening. The way a warm shower clears your mind. The way a faint whiff of lavender or vanilla can bring calm. The people of the 17th century were not so different. They, too, sought these moments of peace. They, too, hoped that a little fragrance might carry them into gentler dreams. And so, we close this first chapter with a breath. Inhale deeply. Imagine the air carrying the faint sweetness of roses, the quiet herbal touch of lavender, the soft musk of ambergris. Exhale slowly, letting it drift away like candle smoke fading into night. Perfume, in its dawn in France, was more than a scent. It was survival. It was art. It was comfort. It was hope. And now, as we leave behind the perfumed dawn, we'll wander deeper into this world. For beyond the chambers and the courts, beyond the sachets and the gloves, there are stranger, sweeter, and more peculiar stories waiting to be told. So let your mind rest here, warm and quiet, as we turn the page. The scented journey continues, but you may already feel your body loosening, your thoughts softening, your dreams drawing near. Chapter 2. The Gardens of Scent. Close your eyes, and imagine walking slowly through a French garden in the 1600s. The early morning air is cool, touched with dew. The grass bends softly underfoot, damp and fragrant. A faint mist hovers, veiling the hedges and statues in pale silver light. Somewhere, a bird begins its first tentative song. This is not just any garden. It is a garden designed to be a stage for scent. At Versailles, Louis XIV's sprawling masterpiece of control and spectacle, flowers were planted not only for beauty, but for the perfume they carried. Walk through an avenue of orange trees, and the blossoms fill your lungs with their honeyed air. Turn into a parterre of roses, and the sweetness is so thick it feels almost like a physical presence, clinging to your clothes, your hair. Every part of the landscape was arranged like notes in a fragrance. Top notes of citrus, middle notes of roses, deep bass notes of jasmine and musk. The Sun King adored this. He was known for his obsession with orange blossoms. At one point, hundreds of orange trees were housed in Versailles orangery. Vast stone galleries designed to protect them in winter, but in summer, rolled out to flood the gardens with scent. Imagine the extravagance. Entire orchards wheeled in and out like perfume bottles on parade. The effect was intoxicating. Guests would wander through the alleys, overwhelmed by the scents as much as the sights. Perfumed fountains sprayed rose water. Pathways were lined with lavender. At night, with torches flickering, the air became a mingled tapestry of smoke, flowers, and spice. It's almost funny, when you think about it. Here was a king trying to bottle the sky, to take the fleeting, wild fragrance of a flower and command it, to order it to bloom and perfume on his schedule. And yet, Isn't that what perfume itself always attempts? To capture something fleeting, to hold summer and winter, to trap joy in a vial. Beyond Versailles, noble estates across France followed suit. Gardens became stages of scent. Wealthy families competed to outdo each other, not just in size or fountains, but in perfume. Which family could bring the rarest blooms, the most intoxicating combinations? Who could summon the newest exotic flower from distant lands? In this way, perfume was political, even botanical. The tulip craze of the Netherlands, the jasmine gardens of Provence, the imported spices of the East, all were woven into the perfumed competition of the era. To smell rare was to be rare. To smell exotic was to show the reach of your influence. And while nobles competed, perfumers thrived. Their recipes expanded, their palates grew wider. They blended rose with clove, orange blossom with musk, jasmine with amber. Each garden inspired new bottles. Each bloom became a note in the growing symphony of 17th-century fragrance. Imagine being a guest invited to one of these garden walks. You step carefully along gravel paths, the crunch of stone underfoot. Around you, towering hedges rise, trimmed into precise shapes. Statues peer from alcoves, their marble cool and pale. And then, the air shifts. First lavender, faint and herbal, then suddenly jasmine, heavy and intoxicating. It's like walking through a perfume bottle, each turn of the path revealing a new accord. How would you feel walking through such a garden? Perhaps dizzy, overwhelmed by so much scent at once. Or perhaps enchanted, carried along as though the very air were conspiring to please you. It's worth pausing on that thought, the sheer sensory richness of these gardens. In our world, we are so used to single, controlled scents, one candle, one spray. But here, in the 1600s, the air itself was a wild orchestra, every note layered, every corner humming. To walk through a garden was to be enveloped, consumed, transformed. Even at night, the gardens remained alive. Candles floated on pools of water. Torches lined pathways. Shadows danced against hedges, while the night air grew heavy with perfume. Imagine drifting slowly through such a place after supper, the faint strains of music from violins, the warmth of wine still in your belly, and all around you, the mingled breath of roses, citrus, lavender, and smoke. It is almost too much for waking thought, don't you think? A place designed to dazzle not only the eye but the nose, to overwhelm you until you surrendered completely to the king's power. And yet, as overwhelming as it was also strangely soothing. To breathe in those scents, to let them wash over you, was to forget, for a moment, the weight of daily life. Perfume, once again, became escape, a way of stepping outside of the ordinary, a way of slipping into dream. And perhaps, as you imagine yourself wandering there now, your body tucked softly into the present, you can let the same escape settle over you. The scents may be only imagined, but they are no less calming. A whiff of rose, a brush of lavender, a breath of orange blossom, gentle companions to guide you further into rest. The gardens of scent were more than ornaments of power. They were the visible, tangible extension of perfume culture itself, a world where fragrance was not just worn, but lived. And so, as we close this first part of Chapter 2, hold in your mind the image of Versailles at dawn. Mist over the hedges, orange blossoms glowing pale in the first light, the faint rustle of leaves, and the sweet, intoxicating promise of a day perfumed by nature and by man's eager hand. As the morning grows brighter over Versailles, the perfumes of the gardens awaken more fully. The mist begins to lift, revealing beds of roses stretching in carefully tended lines. The petals glisten with dew, each drop catching the light like crystal. The air is filled with that unmistakable fragrance, sweet, soft, and faintly green, as if the earth itself is sighing in contentment. Walking further, you would pass the lavender beds. Their purple spikes lean gently, humming with bees who move from bloom to bloom. The smell is sharper than roses, more herbal, almost medicinal. But in the 17th century, lavender was prized for its ability to calm the nerves, to soothe anxieties. Guests strolling past may have bent slightly, brushing their fingers against the stems, then lifting the scent to their faces. A moment of serenity, plucked from the garden itself. The design of these gardens was never random. The king's gardeners thought carefully about which plants would bloom at which times, ensuring that fragrance was not a fleeting luxury, but a constant one. In spring, orange blossoms. In summer, jasmine. In autumn, late roses. Even in winter, the orangery kept citrus trees alive, their fruits glowing like golden lanterns. Each season brought its own perfume, and the gardens became a kind of living calendar, marked not by dates, but by scents. What a curious thought, that instead of remembering months by weather or holidays, one might recall them by aromas. Imagine saying, "Ah, yes, it was the season of jasmine," or "I recall that summer of lavender." In a way, it's not so different from how we remember our own lives by scents. The smell of sunscreen and salt may remind us of a beach trip, while cinnamon and pine call back winter holidays. Fragrance is the memory keeper, the invisible diary we all carry. Now, picture the courtiers, dressed in silks and lace, strolling through the scented alleys. Their wigs powdered, their gloves perfumed, their very steps leaving trails of fragrance behind them. The air must have been dense with perfume, both natural from the gardens and artificial from their attire. Each conversation, each laugh, was layered with invisible clouds of scent, mingling and merging until the air itself was heavy with history. Sometimes, entire gatherings were held in these perfumed gardens. Dinners, concerts, dances, all staged outdoors, with the flowers themselves serving as silent hosts. Imagine sitting at a long table beneath the stars, the meal unfolding in courses while the air swirled with roses and orange blossoms. Lanterns swinging softly, violins playing, the king himself smiling at the head of the table. You sip your wine, the glass catching the flicker of torchlight, and all the while the scents of the garden wrap around you like an unseen cloak. The symbolism was clear. France, under Louis XIV, was the land of eternal bloom, eternal perfume, eternal summer. The king himself was the sun, and the gardens revolved around him like planets, forever radiant, forever scented. But of course, nature has its limits. The orange trees needed careful tending, the roses wilted, the lavender faded. Behind the beauty lay immense labor. Gardeners rose before dawn to water, prune, and coax each bloom. Workers hauled heavy pots of citrus trees in and out of the orangery, protecting them from frost. The illusion of effortless fragrance required countless hidden hands. Isn't that always the way? Behind every simple pleasure lies unseen effort. The perfume you inhale comes from months of cultivation, weeks of distillation, hours of careful blending. The beauty of Versailles, like the perfume itself, was carefully staged. To the guest, it seemed natural, divine. To those who labored, it was sweat and toil. And yet, the result was undeniable. Visitors left in awe, their senses overwhelmed, their memories marked by fragrance. Letters written afterward often mentioned the scents as much as the sights. One guest described the air as so full of sweetness, one could almost taste it. Another wrote that the gardens enchanted the soul with roses. Perfume had become landscape. It was not only something worn, but something walked through, breathed in, lived. As we pause here, imagine yourself seated on a stone bench beneath a tree. The branches sway softly, releasing the faintest citrus note. Your hands rest in your lap, still. The gravel path crunches faintly as others pass, their whispers blending with the rustle of leaves. You breathe in deeply, the mingled scents of roses, lavender, orange blossom, and exhale slowly, letting them soften your mind. You are both guest and dreamer here, strolling through gardens that exist now only in memory, yet are alive again in your imagination. And perhaps that is the truest power of perfume. Long after the flowers fade, long after the fountains dry, the memory of the scent remains. Invisible, but eternal. So as this part closes, let your thoughts linger in that garden, the morning sun rising, the scents mingling, the world unfolding slowly around you in fragrance and calm. Beyond the roses and lavender of France's own soil, the 17th century garden of scent was shaped by faraway places. Ships sailed across oceans, caravans crossed deserts, and through their long journeys came treasures that seemed almost magical, spices, resins, and flowers unknown to most Europeans until they arrived in tiny bundles and bottles. carried into Paris like whispers from another world. Close your eyes and picture the docks of Marseille in the 1600s. The creak of wooden ships, the shouts of sailors, the heavy scent of tar and salt water. And then, tucked in the cargo holds, treasures, sacks of cloves from the East Indies, cinnamon sticks curled like little scrolls, nutmeg the size of marbles, their scent sharp and warm even through the sackcloth. When these spices arrived, perfumers and apothecaries alike were quick to seize them. Cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg were not only for kitchens. They were crushed, distilled, and folded into perfume recipes. A noblewoman's sachet might carry the same clove that flavored a stew. A gentleman's gloves might smell faintly of cinnamon, a scent both exotic and comforting. And then came resins, sticky, aromatic tears of trees from Arabia and Africa. Myrrh, frankincense, benzoin. Their scents were heavier, smoky, resinous. When burned, they released curling plumes of fragrant smoke, long associated with churches and rituals. In perfume, they added depth and longevity, like the bass notes in a song. One drop of benzoin could anchor a whole blend, giving the delicate rose or lavender something to cling to. But the most coveted imports were flowers, especially jasmine. Jasmine, originally from Persia and India, was treasured for its intoxicating, night-blooming fragrance. Caravans carried dried petals across continents, but soon, cultivation began in southern France, especially near Grasse. Fields of jasmine bloomed, their scent strongest at night, when the flowers opened wide under the stars. Picture workers in the dim light of dawn, carefully gathering blossoms before the sun grew too hot. The baskets filled quickly, the air almost too thick with their perfume. By evening, the flowers were already steeped in fat or water, their essence captured before it faded. Jasmine became the queen of imported flowers, adored at court, blended into powders, waters, and oils. Its arrival transformed French perfumery, giving it a richness that local roses and lavender could not achieve alone. Orange blossom, too, became a royal favorite. Though citrus had been known in Europe for centuries, it was in the 1600s that its perfume truly blossomed in France. Bitter orange trees were planted not only for their fruit, but for their delicate white flowers, whose scent was sweet yet fresh, calming yet bright. Louis XIV adored orange blossoms so much that entire orangeries were built to house the trees, wheeled out in summer to flood the gardens with their perfume. It is fascinating to think of the global journey behind these scents. A clove from Indonesia, jasmine from Persia, benzoin from Siam, all finding their way into Parisian shops, all ending up in a sachet or glove in Versailles. To wear such a perfume was to carry the world with you, invisibly, on your skin. And of course, the rarer the ingredient, the greater its power. To smell of jasmine was to show your wealth. To smell of ambergris, a waxy, ocean-worn substance from Wales, was to proclaim extravagance. To wear musk from Tibet or civet from Africa was to declare connections that span the globe. Perfume became not only a mask of scent, but a badge of influence. Imagine attending a gathering at court. The hall is filled with laughter and candlelight. A lady passes by, her perfume carrying the soft sweetness of rose. Another follows, and the air shifts, cinnamon, clove, something spicy and mysterious. A third glides past, and suddenly jasmine, heavy and intoxicating, fills the space. Each guest carries a fragment of the world, and together they weave a tapestry of global scent, stitched silently into the air. There's something mesmerizing in that thought. In a time before airplanes, before photographs, before quick travel, people could experience faraway lands through fragrance. A single drop of oil brought Persia, or India, or Africa into a French chamber. Scent was a form of travel, a way of collapsing distance, of touching the faraway with nothing more than a breath. And yet, for all their exoticism, these perfumes were still human, still intimate. They were dabbed onto wrists, brushed into wigs, sprinkled over linens. They mingled with laughter, with sighs, with whispered secrets in candlelit rooms. The faraway was made personal. The exotic became part of a nightly ritual, part of the quiet turning down of a bed or the slow preparation for a ball. So as you rest here now, imagine yourself as one of those courtiers, moving slowly through the gardens after supper. The night air carries roses, yes, but also a sharper note. Clove from some imported sachet, jasmine rising from a perfumed glove. You breathe in, and though you have never traveled beyond France, you carry the world in your lungs. Perfume in this age was not only about beauty. It was about connection, about stretching across oceans and deserts, about bringing the far away into the palm of your hand. Each breath was a story, each scent a journey. And as you let that idea settle into your mind, perhaps you can feel the same. Your own breath carrying stories, your own space filled with invisible threads that tie you, quietly, to others, to history, to dreams. Perfume is never just perfume. It is travel. It is memory. It is hope. And with that, let us pause here, in this mingled air of roses and cloves, jasmine and smoke. The gardens of scent are wide, and we still have paths to walk, stories to tell. Imagine the gardens not in the quiet of dawn, nor in the warmth of a calm afternoon, but in the full blaze of celebration. The Sun King, Louis XIV, adored spectacle. Every detail of his reign was staged to dazzle, to overwhelm, to remind all who saw him that he was the center of the universe. And what better way to do this than to perfume the very air his guests breathed? Picture it. Torches lit along endless avenues, their flames dancing against the dark sky. The fountains gushing, not with plain water, but with perfumed streams. Rosewater spilling down marble tiers. Orange blossom mist drifting into the night air. Guests arrive, their footsteps crunching softly on gravel, their silks whispering as they move. The orchestra begins, violins rising in elegant swells, and all around, the invisible host, fragrance, envelopes them. To walk through these festivals was to step into another world. Perfume was not merely an accessory, but a weapon of enchantment. Imagine hundreds of orange trees rolled into the garden, each one blooming, each one releasing sweetness into the night. Guests strolling past could barely separate flower from air. They breathed it in as if it were life itself. And then there were the perfumed torches. Yes, even the flames carried fragrance. Wicks soaked in aromatic oils, pine, resin, clove, burned with smoky sweetness, sending invisible ribbons into the crowd. To stand in the garden was to be wrapped in a tapestry of scent and sound, sight and taste, all woven together by careful design. It might seem extravagant, almost absurd, but extravagance was the language of Versailles. To perfume a fountain was no more unusual than to build a hall of mirrors. Both reflected the same message. Here is power, here is beauty, here is control over even the fleeting. I like to imagine one guest, perhaps a young courtier, nervous and eager, walking among these wonders for the first time. They pause by a fountain, lean closer, and realize the water itself smells of roses. Their eyes widen. They sip from their goblet of wine, but even the air they inhale is intoxicating. For a moment, they are lost in it, unsure if they stand in a garden or inside a perfume bottle, spun into something both real and dreamlike. What must it have felt like to live in a world where scent was staged with such intensity? Perhaps overwhelming, yes, but perhaps also strangely calming. Like walking through a waking dream, where the ordinary world dissolved, leaving only music, candlelight, and fragrance. And of course, fragrance was used to impress not just courtiers but ambassadors, visitors, dignitaries from across Europe. To walk through Versailles was to be enveloped, immediately, in the king's perfume of power. How could one argue with a monarch whose very fountains ran with roses? Even meals during these festivals were perfumed. Roasted meats glazed with spices, candied fruits infused with orange blossom water, pastries dusted with rose sugar. To taste was to inhale. The line between food and fragrance blurred until the two became inseparable. The banquet hall and the garden alike were stages of scent, each reinforcing the other, each overwhelming the senses until they bent in awe. At times, entire theatrical performances were staged in the gardens, with actors, dancers, and musicians moving through perfumed air. Clouds of incense rose, drifting against the torchlight. Perfumed rain was even described, sprays of scented water falling like mist on delighted guests. It was spectacle layered upon spectacle, all designed to leave an imprint that would never fade. I find it calming to imagine it slowly, not as a riot of sensation, but as a quiet drift. Close your eyes and picture standing in the orangery at night. The scent of blossoms is thick, warm in the summer air. Torches hiss and crackle softly, releasing smoky sweetness. In the distance, music sways, violins and flutes weaving through the night. Around you, laughter rises and falls like a tide. And above it all, fragrance. Roses, citrus, spice. A gentle, invisible hand guiding your thoughts into dream. The courtiers may have been dazzled, but they were also lulled. Perfumes softened them, relaxed them, made them pliant. Perhaps this was part of the Sun King's genius, to intoxicate not only with beauty and wealth, but with invisible enchantment. Power disguised as perfume. And yet, beneath the grandeur, it was still human. A guest brushing a hand along lavender leaves, inhaling softly. A lady adjusting her perfumed gloves, releasing a faint trail of jasmine. A gentleman lifting his goblet, the scent of orange blossom clinging faintly to his sleeve. Small moments of intimacy, woven into the vast stage. It's worth pausing here, letting yourself imagine that same balance. The vast and the small, the overwhelming and the personal. Just as in life, where even the grandest events are remembered through tiny fragments. The sound of laughter, the glow of a single candle, the scent of one flower. So as we close this part, hold the image of Versailles at festival. Fountains spilling with rose water, torches hissing with spice, music weaving through candlelit paths, and all the while, the perfume of gardens rising to the heavens, as if even the stars themselves were being serenaded with fragrance. As the festival lights fade, and the last chords of music dissolve into the night, the gardens of Versailles return to stillness. The fountains, no longer perfumed, fall silent. The orange trees stand quietly, their blossoms folding in the cool air. The roses rest, their fragrance softened now, less insistent, like a whisper settling into memory. This is perhaps the most enchanting time in the gardens, the quiet after the spectacle. The courtiers have gone, their laughter echoing faintly as they retreat to chambers and halls. The torches burn lower, their smoke rising lazily into the dark sky. And yet, the perfume lingers, invisible but persistent. Even after the grand gestures are gone, the flowers remain, breathing out their steady sweetness. It is here, in this stillness, that one can best appreciate the gardens not as theater, but as sanctuary. A place where scent is not overwhelming, not staged for applause, but simply present. Imagine yourself seated on a stone bench, alone, the coolness of the night air brushing your skin. You inhale, and there it is, the faintest trace of lavender, the sweetness of orange blossom, the subtle earthiness of roses. No orchestra, no fountains, no courtly games. Just you and the living perfume of the garden. How soothing it must have been for those who found themselves awake late at night, wandering through the alleys under moonlight. The king may have claimed the garden for spectacle, but the flowers, in their quiet hours, offered a different gift, calm. A reminder that beauty exists even when no one is watching. Perfume has always carried this dual nature. It dazzles in public, but it comforts in private. The grand festivals of Versailles showcased fragrance as power, as performance, as a way to control and impress. But in the simple act of inhaling a rose at midnight, perfume became personal. It became human again. Think of how fragrance works even now. A perfume may be marketed with grandeur, tied to fame or wealth, but in the end, it is only you who wears it. Only you who inhales it in the quiet moments. It becomes yours in the private spaces, on your skin, on your pillow, in your memories. The courtiers of Versailles were no different. Behind the glitter, they too must have found solace in a single sachet of lavender or the quiet sweetness of an orange blossom tucked into a pocket. In many ways, the gardens reflected the contradictions of 17th century France, a nation of both extravagance and hardship, a world of grand courts and narrow streets, a time when perfume was both mask and comfort, both illusion and truth. The flowers of Versailles bloomed not only for the king, but for the weary who found themselves soothed by their presence. I imagine a servant, pausing after a long day, inhaling the faint drift of jasmine carried on the night air, or a musician, lingering after a performance, sitting by a fountain and letting the rosewater mist soften his tired face. These quiet moments are not recorded in history, but they must have happened, for fragrance cannot be contained. It belongs to whoever breathes it in. And so, the gardens lived on, not only as symbols of power, but as secret wells of peace. Now, as you listen, let yourself feel that same peace. Imagine walking slowly down a gravel path. The air is cool, the stars bright. The scents are softer now, blending together into a gentle hum rather than a chorus. Lavender, rose, orange blossom, the faintest hint of musk. They rise and fall with your breath, guiding you deeper into calm. You are no longer a guest of the king, nor a courtier in lace. You are simply yourself, wandering, inhaling, resting. The gardens open not as theater, but as dream. Perfume, in this quiet way, reveals its truest gift, the ability to carry you beyond the present moment, to soften edges, to remind you of sweetness, to lead you gently toward rest. And as we close this chapter, let us leave Versailles behind for now. The gardens will remain, blooming and fragrant, but we will step onward, into new corners of the perfumed world. There are workshops to explore, recipes to uncover, stories of strange ingredients and curious traditions waiting for us. But for now, rest with this: the gardens of scent, grand and small, dazzling and soothing. A world where fragrance was both spectacle and sanctuary, both command and comfort. Take a breath. Inhale slowly, exhale gently. Let the perfume of the past drift softly through your imagination until it feels as though you, too, have walked those scented paths. And when you are ready, we will continue deeper into the strange, fragrant story of 17th century France. Chapter 3. Recipes of Mystery and Musk. Let us slip now from the grand gardens of Versailles into smaller, darker rooms. The perfumers' workshops, where fragrance was born not of sunlight and flowers, but of bubbling stills, crushed powders, and curious little jars filled with strange ingredients. The 17th century perfumer was part artist, part alchemist, part magician. Their shops smelled like no other place on earth. A jumble of sweetness, spice, and something faintly animal, all layered so thickly that one could become dizzy simply by breathing. If you close your eyes, you might imagine stepping inside one now. A low ceiling, wooden shelves lined with bottles, bundles of herbs hanging overhead, a copper still hissing gently in the corner, steam curling upward in ghostly tendrils. The air is warm, heavy, alive with mingled scents. The recipes themselves were both fascinating and, at times, unsettling. Today we think of perfume as flowers and citrus, perhaps a little vanilla, perhaps some woods. But in the 1600s, perfumers turned to almost anything that could hold a scent. Roses, yes. Jasmine, certainly. But also ambergris, a waxy lump formed in the belly of a whale and carried by the sea until it washed ashore. Imagine finding such a strange substance, gray and dull, yet when warmed, releasing a sweet, musky scent that made perfumes last for hours, even days. It was treasure from the ocean, more valuable than gold to the perfumer's hand. Then there was civet, a paste taken from the glands of a civet cat, kept in cages in distant lands. To us, it might sound unappealing. Sharp, animalic, almost sour. But to the noses of the 17th century, it was divine, a warm, sensual base that gave life to flowers and spices. Without it, perfumes faded quickly. With it, they bloomed, rich and powerful. Musk, too, was prized, taken from deer. Castoreum from beavers. Even tiny beetles, dried and ground, were sometimes used for their potent notes. Perfume was not shy. It was not delicate. It was a bold blending of the natural world, in all its sweetness and strangeness. Alongside these animalic treasures came the spices. Cinnamon sticks, cloves, nutmeg, cardamom, all carried from faraway lands, their journey as exotic as their scent. A recipe might call for rose and musk layered with clove, or jasmine folded into cinnamon and ambergris. The result was not a simple floral note, but something deeper, stranger, almost edible. Imagine a perfume that smelled halfway between a garden and a spice market, halfway between a glove and a feast. And then there were the powders. Orris root, ground from the iris plant, carried a soft, violet-like sweetness. It was dried for years before it could be used, requiring patience and foresight. Perfumers dusted it into wigs, worked it into sachets, blended it with rose petals to make sweet-smelling pastes. Orris was considered elegant, refined, a quiet counterpoint to the wilder scents of civet or musk. Perfume recipes were often written like spells. Take of rose water, of musk, of ambergris, each a dram. Infuse in spirits. Strain through cloth. Anoint gloves, sachets, or the temples for relief of the vapors. The language blurred medicine and beauty, cure and charm. One recipe might be for a perfume, another for a remedy, and sometimes they were the same. There's a curious charm in that, isn't there? Imagine having a headache, and instead of reaching for a tablet, you dab your temples with rosewater and musk. Or feeling anxious, and lifting a sachet of lavender and clove to your face. Whether it truly worked or not, the ritual itself must have brought comfort. Not all recipes were for the faint of heart, though. Some called for vinegar steeped with herbs, meant to cut through foul air. Others used camphor, sharp and almost medicinal, to ward off sickness. Still others blended frankincense and myrrh, heavy and resinous, creating scents that seemed more like church incense than personal perfume. It is here, perhaps, that we see the heart of 17th century perfumery, its willingness to embrace contrasts. Sweet and sharp, floral and animal, comforting and unsettling. Each perfume was a little world unto itself, layered with contradictions, rich with mystery. And yet, for all the strangeness of the recipes, there was something soothing in the act of making them. Picture the perfumer leaning over a mortar, grinding cinnamon slowly into powder. The steady, rhythmic motion, the low hum of bubbling water in the still. The careful drip, drip, drip of oil condensing into a vial. It was work, yes, but also meditation. Each recipe a ritual, each bottle a small piece of captured dream. Now, imagine being a customer, stepping into that workshop. You might request a sachet for your linens, a bottle of rose water for your skin, or a pair of perfumed gloves. The perfumer would consult their notes, measure powders, stir liquids, blend carefully, and then, with a flourish, present you with something invisible yet powerful, a fragrance that would follow you through your days, whispering of roses, cloves, amber, and musk. There is something almost alchemical about it, isn't there? To take bits of flower, spice, and animal and turn them into something greater than the sum of their parts. To make memory, mood, and mystery in liquid form. And so, as we rest in this first part of Chapter 3, let your mind linger in that small perfumer's shop. The shelves lined with jars, the faint warmth of the fire, the air thick with mingled scents. It is strange, yes, a little unsettling at times, but it is also magical, soothing in its rhythm, calming in its quiet purpose. Perfume, after all, was never just about smelling pleasant. It was about transformation, about carrying the world, in all its strangeness and sweetness, upon your skin. Breathe slowly. Inhale the memory of roses and cloves, of jasmine and musk. Exhale gently, letting it drift into dream. The recipes of mystery and musk are only beginning. More curious ingredients await us, more stories of strangeness, more whispers of the perfumed past. Step a little closer now, into the darker jars on the perfumer's shelf, the ones tucked in corners, labeled carefully, guarded almost like secrets. These are the ingredients that made 17th century perfumes so unusual to our modern senses. Animal, ocean, earth, and myth, all mixed into tiny vials. Perhaps the most legendary of all was ambergris. Imagine walking along a rocky shoreline, the waves slapping gently against stone, gulls crying above. You spot something washed ashore, gray, lumpy, almost like stone but strangely soft to the touch. This is ambergris, born deep inside the belly of a sperm whale, hardened over time, and eventually carried by the sea until it lands at your feet. To most, it might seem like nothing special. But to the perfumer, ambergris was treasure. When warmed, it released a sweet, musky, almost marine fragrance, subtle and lingering. More than that, it acted as a fixative, making delicate floral scents last longer. Without ambergris, perfumes faded quickly. With it, they clung, trailing their owner like a whispered secret. Stories spread around ambergris, as if it were enchanted. Some believed it had mystical properties, that it could cure ailments or protect against poison. Others thought it was hardened sea foam, or even a gift from dragons that dwelled in the ocean's depths. Few understood its true origin, and perhaps that was part of the magic. To wear ambergris was to wear the mystery of the sea itself. Then there was Civet. Picture a small, cat-like creature kept in a cage, fed carefully, watched closely. From its glands, a waxy paste was collected, sharp and pungent to the nose. To us, the thought may be unsettling. But once blended, Civet became warm, sensual, almost honeyed. It gave perfumes depth, longevity, and a hint of wildness. In Paris, Civet was adored. Some noble women were so fond of it that satirists mocked them, claiming the court smelled more of civet cats than flowers. But that didn't matter. Civet was luxury, Civet was power. A dab of it in gloves or sachets turned ordinary florals into something that lingered, something unforgettable. And musk, true musk, was perhaps the most prized of all. Taken from a small gland of the male musk deer, it was dried and ground into powder, then infused into alcohol to create an essence that was rich, earthy, almost human in its warmth. To those of the 17th century, musk was intoxicating. It blurred the line between body and perfume, making the wearer seem alive with invisible fire. Like ambergris and civet, musk carried myths. Some believed it was an aphrodisiac, a secret key to desire. Others saw it as almost holy, too powerful to be worn casually. To have musk in your perfume was to declare yourself part of the elite, someone who could afford to harness nature's rarest treasures. Even stranger still was castoreum, drawn from beavers. Used less often, but still prized, it carried a leathery, smoky scent that blended well with floral notes. And then there were the tiniest of contributors, cochineal insects, dried and ground for their vivid red color, sometimes lending not just scent but tint to powders and pastes. It may seem odd, even unpleasant, to us now, but for them, these ingredients were the height of refinement. They were not thinking of whales or cats or deer. They were thinking of the effect, the way a perfume could last through a long evening, the way it could turn heads, the way it could whisper wealth without a word. And perhaps there's something very human in that. To take the world around us, however strange, and transform it into beauty. To say, this, too, has a place in the story of elegance. There were lighter myths, too. Some believed ambergris formed when lightning struck the sea. Others joked that civet was the perfume of the gods, bottled by cats who lived only to please royalty. Recipes were shared in whispers, each perfumer protecting their own secrets while spreading rumors about others. Was that noblewoman's perfume touched with ambergris? Or was it only rosewater with a pinch of clove? No one could be sure. The mystery itself was part of the allure. Picture a noble at court, leaning slightly toward another, a faint smile on their lips. The fragrance they wore, sweet, musky, spicy, hung between them like an unspoken message. Perhaps it contained ambergris, perhaps civet, perhaps both. The other leans in, inhaling, their eyes widening slightly. Words are exchanged, but it is the scent that lingers long after the conversation is forgotten. Perfume was not only invisible, it was intimate. It traveled where words could not. It lingered when gestures were done. And these strange ingredients, ambergris, civet, musk, gave it its power. If you pause now and take a slow breath, you might imagine the layers of it. First, the bright top, citrus, perhaps a spritz of orange blossom. Then the heart, jasmine, rose, lavender, blooming warm. And beneath it all, the base, musk, ambergris, civet, clinging, holding, humming quietly like a secret in the dark. Strange, yes, but strangely comforting too. A reminder that beauty often comes from unlikely places, that even the most curious of origins can become, in the right hands, something tender, even soothing. And as you rest in that thought, picture again the perfumer's workshop, the vials gleaming in candlelight, the shelves stacked with herbs, flowers, spices, and on the highest shelf, tucked away, those rare treasures, the whale's gift, the cat's paste, the deer's musk. Silent, waiting, ready to be blended into something that would outlast them all. This is the paradox of perfume, born of the fleeting, crafted from the strange, yet made to linger. A drop of ambergris, a pinch of musk, and suddenly, a flower's breath becomes eternal. So as we close this part, let yourself breathe gently, knowing that even the strangest ingredients can weave into something calming, something beautiful, something worth remembering. The recipes grow stranger still, and in the next part, we'll step into the rituals, the powders, and the daily ways perfume was used, not just at court, but in the intimate routines of life. Not all perfumes were worn for courtly display, nor blended only for festivals and feasts. Many lived quietly in the daily routines of men and women, weaving their way into the fabric of ordinary life. These perfumes were not always grand. They were practical, intimate, and deeply personal. Imagine waking in a Parisian chamber as the morning light creeps through the shutters. The bedclothes are heavy with the faint sweetness of lavender sachets tucked between the sheets. You rise slowly, reaching for a handkerchief scented with orange blossom water. The air is cool, but the fragrance warms you, easing the transition from sleep into waking. Perfumed waters were common for washing the face or hands. Rose water was the most beloved, gentle, refreshing, carrying with it not only fragrance but the illusion of purity. In a time when full bathing was rare, these fragrant rinses became substitutes. A dab of rose water on the temples could calm, on the wrists could refresh. Orange blossom water brightened, lavender water soothed. Each was a tiny ritual of comfort, repeated daily like prayer. Powders were another part of the perfumed rhythm. Orris root, ground fine, was mixed with rose petals or violet to make powders for the hair and wigs. A gentleman might dust his wig lightly, releasing a faint floral cloud each time he bowed. A lady might pat a little into her hair, so that even in a crowded salon, a breeze would carry the perfume softly through the air. Sachets were tucked everywhere, into drawers, to scent linens, into bodices, to carry a secret sweetness close to the skin, into pockets, to be lifted discreetly to the nose when the streets outside grew foul. Imagine the comfort of reaching for a small embroidered pouch filled with dried lavender, rosemary, and a hint of clove. A deep breath could transform a moment of discomfort into one of calm. Perfumed gloves remained a fashion, too. Slipping on a pair was like donning both protection and perfume at once. The leather released its scent with each movement of the hand. In conversation, every gesture became a fragrant flourish. Some gloves were scented so richly that the aroma lingered in rooms long after their owner had left. Even letters were perfumed. A courtier might dab a drop of rose water onto paper, or press a sachet against it before sealing. Imagine receiving such a letter, breaking the wax seal, unfolding the parchment, and being greeted not only by words, but by scent. A whisper of the sender's presence, carried invisibly across distance. How intimate it must have felt, as if their very breath had crossed the miles. Perfume was woven into remedies, too. Lavender water to calm headaches, rosemary to sharpen memory, rose to cool fevers. Whether these cures worked or not mattered less than the comfort they gave. The scent itself was reassurance. And in a world where illness was feared and poorly understood, such reassurance was invaluable. At night, perfumes softened the passage into sleep. Lavender sachets placed beneath pillows. Rose water sprinkled lightly on bedclothes. Even perfumed candles, their flames releasing faint sweetness as they burned low. The chamber became not only a place of rest, but of fragrance, each night scented like a gentle dream. There's something deeply soothing in these rituals. Even across centuries, they feel familiar. We, too, seek small comforts in scent, candles, teas, oils, sprays. The rhythm of daily life feels gentler when wrapped in fragrance. But in the 17th century, there was also an undercurrent of necessity. These perfumes were not only pleasant, they were shields. Against the smell of crowded streets, against the fear of disease, against the weight of poor sanitation. A sachet of lavender was more than a luxury. It was a breath of safety, a fragile mask against an uncertain world. Still, within this necessity, there was beauty. Perfume turned the act of dressing, of writing, of resting, into ceremony. Small ceremonies, repeated quietly, each one softening life's edges. Imagine, now, sitting by a window in the late afternoon. The sun sinks low, its light warm and golden. You reach for a handkerchief scented with violet. You hold it gently to your face, inhaling the faint sweetness. Outside, the streets may be noisy, harsh, and foul, but within, you are wrapped in calm. Perfume has created a pocket of peace, invisible but real. And as night falls, you tuck a sachet of rosemary and rose beneath your pillow. The chamber is still, the fire low, the linens faintly fragrant. You close your eyes, the scent lingering softly, guiding you into sleep. This was the quiet magic of perfume in the 17th century. Not only the festivals and fountains, but the sachets and waters, the gloves and letters, the nightly comforts that turned an uncertain world into something gentler. And so, as we pause at the close of this part, let your mind rest on these small rituals. The handkerchief, the sachet, the powder, the letter, each a fragment of fragrance, each a moment of peace. Perfume was never only about the grand spectacle. It was also about the small comforts, the daily breaths that made life sweeter, softer, calmer. In the 17th century, perfume was never only about smelling sweet. It was also about survival. The line between fragrance and medicine was thin, blurred by belief and necessity. To carry a sachet of lavender, to dab rose water on the skin, to inhale clove or rosemary, these were not just luxuries. They were protections, small shields against a world that seemed constantly threatened by illness. Remember, this was an age of plague, of sudden fevers and mysterious vapors. The miasma theory was widely believed, that disease traveled through foul air, drifting invisibly through streets and chambers. If bad air brought sickness, then good air, perfumed air, might protect. A pocket pomander filled with clove or cinnamon could feel like armor. A spritz of rosewater on linens might feel like a barrier. To breathe in fragrance was to breathe in safety. Perfume was prescribed as cure. Lavender water for headaches, rose for heart palpitations, rosemary for memory and clarity. Vinegar steeped with herbs, sometimes called four thieves' vinegar, was believed to guard against plague. People dabbed it on skin, soaked cloth in it to cover their faces, or carried it in small vials. Whether it worked or not, no one truly knew. But the act of using it gave comfort, and perhaps that was its own kind of medicine. Apothecaries sold perfumed remedies alongside their tinctures and syrups. Imagine stepping into a shop with shelves of glass jars, filled not only with powders and roots, but with fragrant waters. The apothecary listens to your complaint, sleeplessness, melancholy, faintness, and then pours a little rose water, perhaps with a touch of clove, into a vial. You leave, holding not just a cure, but a small bottle of reassurance. Perfume was also thought to purify the air itself. Houses were sometimes fumigated with incense or burning herbs. Frankincense, myrrh, and benzoin smoldered in small burners, their smoke curling into corners. The idea was that the smoke would drive out illness, pushing away the invisible clouds of danger. Doctors themselves carried pomanders filled with spices, holding them to their noses while visiting the sick. Some even believed that perfume could raise the spirits in more mystical ways, that certain scents could ward off evil or invite blessings. Ambergris, for example, was considered not only a fixative for perfume but a charm of protection. Musk was thought to ignite desire, but also to give vitality. Perfumed waters were sprinkled not only on linens, but sometimes at doorways, as if scent itself could create a boundary between safety and harm. Superstition lingered in every drop. To some, perfume was a potion, a spell. To others, it was holy, its smoke echoing the incense of churches, its fragrance reminding them of prayer. In this way, perfume was caught between science, faith, and magic, respected by all, explained by none. There were curious cases where perfume became almost absurdly medicinal. One recipe advised carrying a clove-studded orange to ward off plague. The fruit was studded so heavily it looked like a tiny, fragrant mace. People carried them in pockets, hung them from belts, or placed them on tables. To us, it may seem quaint, but to them, it was serious protection. The sharp clove, the sweet orange, they believed these scents could drive away death itself. Perfumed vinegar was even dabbed onto masks, especially the famous beaked masks of plague doctors. Those long, bird-like noses were filled with herbs and vinegar-soaked sponges, so that each breath was filtered through scent. The image is unsettling, but the idea was simple. Foul air kills, so fragrant air saves. And yet, even in its strangeness, there was something deeply human in this. To take comfort in lavender, in rose, in orange blossom, was not only about fashion, it was about hope. Hope that beauty might protect. Hope that sweetness might soften suffering. Hope that fragrance could shield against the unseen. At night, these beliefs lingered in small rituals. A sachet tucked under a pillow was not only for calm dreams, but also to keep away sickness. A handkerchief perfumed with vinegar and herbs was placed near the bed, believed to purify the air. A candle scented with rosemary might burn low, its smoke curling like a guardian in the dark. And if you imagine yourself there, tucked under heavy blankets, listening to the faint crackle of the fire, perhaps you would feel the same comfort. A sachet of lavender near your face, a faint trace of rose in your sheets. The belief that these scents carried protection as well as peace. Even if only an illusion, it would have been enough to soothe, enough to help the mind drift toward sleep. Superstition and science may have blurred, but the result was the same. Perfume became part of daily healing, not only for the body, but for the spirit. To breathe in fragrance was to feel, for a moment, safe. And perhaps, even now, that truth remains. The lavender that calms us, the candle that softens a room, the tea that comforts. It may not cure illness, but it heals something quieter, something deeper. The spirit itself. So as we close this part, imagine again a small pomander in your hand. It is filled with cloves, cinnamon, rosemary. You lift it to your nose. Inhale slowly, and feel the faintest relief wash over you. Invisible, intangible, yet enough. Perfume was always more than beauty. It was medicine, superstition, hope. And in its invisible threads, people found the strength to face the uncertain world around them. Perfume, in the 17th century, was never invisible in its meaning. Though the scents themselves drifted unseen, their presence spoke loudly. To wear perfume was to send a message. It was not only about smelling pleasant, but about who you were, who you hoped to be, and how you wanted others to see you. At Versailles, fragrance was as much a part of etiquette as bowing or curtsying. The Sun King adored perfume, and so did his court. To arrive unscented would have been unthinkable, an offense not just against fashion but against the delicate balance of hierarchy. The courtiers layered scents upon themselves, each trying to strike a note of refinement without tipping into excess. A single whiff too strong could spark whispers of poor taste, a scent too faint, and one wrist seeming careless or unpolished. In this way, perfume became a kind of invisible clothing, woven into the fabric of status. Just as lace collars or silken gowns displayed wealth, so did the aroma of musk, jasmine, or ambergris. To smell of rare ingredients was to show you had access to the farthest corners of trade. A clove might signal the East Indies. Jasmine, the gardens of Provence. Ambergris, the mysterious oceans. Each note was a badge of privilege, quietly inhaled by those nearby. Perfume also carried reputation in subtler ways. A noblewoman might be remembered not for her words at a gathering, but for the lingering sweetness she left behind as she departed. A gentleman might cultivate a signature scent, so that even when unseen, his presence was felt. Ah, someone might murmur, "The Duke has passed this way," catching the faintest trace of his gloves on the air. But reputation could cut both ways. Satirists mocked courtiers who wore too much civet, claiming they stank more like animals than nobles. A poorly chosen blend could invite laughter. A too heavy hand with powder might make someone memorable for all the wrong reasons. Just as with words or gestures, fragrance carried risk. To manage it well was to maintain grace. To misstep was to court ridicule. Perfume also became tied to morality in curious ways. Sweet, floral scents were seen as pure, feminine, gentle. Heavy, animalic scents, civet, musk, amber, were linked with sensuality, sometimes even with sin. To smell of jasmine and rose might be charming. To smell of civet too strongly might be scandalous. The same perfume could draw admiration or suspicion, depending on who wore it and how. This tension gave perfume a curious power. It could attract or repel, elevate or condemn. A single sachet, a single spritz, could change how a person was perceived. In a court where everything was performance, perfume was perhaps the most subtle, the most intimate part of the stage. And yet, beyond the politics, perfume was also personal identity. A lady might choose lavender because it reminded her of childhood gardens. A gentleman might wear orange blossom to recall a summer spent in the South. Perfume became memory worn on the skin, a private choice displayed in public. Even within the rigid rules of Versailles, individuals found space to weave their own stories into their scents. There's a calming thought in that even in a world so bound by etiquette, perfume gave a whisper of freedom, a chance to carry one's own memories, one's own comfort, one's own invisible diary. Perfume also played its part in romance. A letter scented with violet could speak more than the words written on the page. A glove perfumed with musk could carry intimacy far beyond a simple touch. Lovers exchanged sachets, tokens filled with fragrance, so that they might carry a part of each other wherever they went. Perfume was not just public language, but private confession. In this way, perfume blurred every boundary. Between fashion and medicine, between public and private, between purity and desire. It was both shield and invitation, both armor and adornment. And for all its complexity, it was still part of the simplest rituals of life. A sachet beneath a pillow, a drop of rosewater on a handkerchief, a spritz of lavender on sheets. Perfume could mean power at Versailles, but it could also mean comfort in a quiet chamber, protection in a crowded street, memory held in a single breath. Imagine, now, closing your eyes and thinking of a fragrance that defines a memory for you. Perhaps the sweetness of vanilla reminding you of a kitchen. Perhaps pine recalling a walk in winter. Perhaps lavender, calming, familiar. This is the thread that ties us to those long-ago courtiers. They, too, held memories in scent. They, too, built reputations in fragrance. They, too, found comfort in invisible whispers of perfume. So as we close this chapter, let us leave the perfumer's workshop and the grand halls of Versailles with one final thought. That perfume, though unseen, was one of the strongest forces in 17th century France. It shaped identity, guarded health, whispered of love, and declared power. It was a recipe of mystery, of musk, of memory. Take a slow breath now, in and out, and imagine yourself carrying a sachet in your pocket, a secret companion of lavender and rose. To the world, it is nothing. To you, it is everything. A shield, a comfort, a story. Perfume was never only scent. It was the invisible language of a century. And soon, as we drift onward, we'll explore how this language spread further still, into food, into celebrations, into some of the strangest delicacies you might never expect. Chapter 4, Fragrant Feasts and Delicate Delicacies. Perfume, in the 17th century, did not live only on the skin or in the chamber. It slipped into the kitchen, into the banquet hall, onto the silver platters, and into the goblets of nobles and kings. In France, taste and smell were inseparable, each feeding the other. The meals of the time were not just seasoned, they were perfumed. Picture yourself seated at a long oak table, its surface gleaming in the glow of candles. Tapestries hang on the walls, muffling the sounds of laughter and music. Servants glide between guests, balancing dishes that steam and glisten. The air itself is thick with aromas, roasted meats, spiced wines, sweet pastries. But woven into all of it are the same scents you might expect in a sachet or glove. Rosewater, orange blossom, lavender, nutmeg and clove. Imagine biting into a pastry, crisp and golden, only to find it filled with almonds and scented with rosewater. Sweet, yes, but also floral, like eating a garden in bloom. Or sipping wine infused with cinnamon and ambergris, its warmth carrying spice and musk together. The flavors are strange, perhaps, to us, but to them, this mingling of perfume and food was luxury, sophistication, a sign of refinement. Rosewater was especially popular. It was drizzled into pastries, stirred into custards, sprinkled onto fruits. Imagine the soft sweetness of an apple tart lifted by the floral sigh of roses. Orange blossom water followed closely, adding brightness to cakes, syrups, and cordials. To taste it was to taste the gardens of Versailles themselves, bottled and brought to the table. Spices, too, were everywhere. Nutmeg grated over stews, cloves pressed into roasted meats, cinnamon stirred into sauces. These were not subtle hints, but bold flourishes, announcing wealth and access. After all, cloves and nutmeg came from oceans away. To use them generously was to show one's reach, one's power, one's place at the table of the world. Sometimes, the overlap between perfume and food was nearly indistinguishable. A recipe for sugared almonds might be identical to a recipe for perfumed sachets, the same rose petals and cinnamon folded in. Only the end use separated them. Imagine the same aroma drifting from a banquet hall and from a noblewoman's bodice, one eaten, the other inhaled. At Versailles, meals were performances as much as sustenance. Dishes arrived in waves, each one carefully staged. A roasted bird might be glazed with orange blossom syrup. A platter of candied fruits might be dusted with violet sugar. A bowl of custard might carry the faint, almost ghostly breath of ambergris, dissolved into milk and honey. The guests not only ate, they inhaled. Each bite was both flavor and fragrance. There is something almost dreamlike in this blending. Eating rosewater pastries, drinking spiced wine, inhaling perfumed gloves. Every sense entangled, every moment layered. To be a courtier was to live inside an orchestra of scent and taste, so complete it must have been overwhelming, and yet deeply comforting. It is curious to think how casually they mingled what we now separate. Today, perfume belongs to the vanity, spices to the kitchen. But then, the same jar of cinnamon might perfume a stew and a sachet. The same rose petals might sweeten a tart and scent a wig. Perhaps, in their world, the boundaries between body and banquet, between feast and fragrance, were softer, more fluid. I like to imagine the quieter moments of this. A noble woman sitting by her window in the late afternoon, sipping a cordial flavored with orange blossom water, while the sachet in her sleeve releases the same fragrance. Or a gentleman writing a letter, his gloves scented with musk and clove, while nibbling sugared almonds dusted with cinnamon. The air and the palate overlapping until one could not tell where taste ended and scent began. And of course, these fragrant foods were tied to health as well. Rosewater was thought to cool fevers. Orange blossom water was believed to calm the heart. Spices like nutmeg and clove were praised for their warming, protective qualities. A banquet was not only indulgence, it was medicine, charm, ritual. Every bite carried a layer of meaning, a belief in healing as well as pleasure. Even at night, after the feasts, perfume lingered in food. Candied violets might be served as a sweet to end the evening. A cup of spiced wine or cordial might soothe digestion. A guest might carry home a sugared almond, wrapped in paper, its rosewater sweetness clinging to the fingers. The boundary between supper and slumber blurred, as fragrance followed them into their beds, tucked into memory as firmly as any sachet. So as you rest now, imagine yourself at such a table. The candlelight is warm, the silverware gleams. You lift a spoon, and the custard carries the faintest taste of roses. You sip wine, and cinnamon curls warmly through your chest. Around you, laughter rises, but beneath it all, fragrance hums, sweet, spicy, soothing. It is not only a meal, but a dream, a feast woven from both flavor and perfume. And perhaps, as you let yourself drift into this vision, you feel the same comfort. That the simplest things, a taste, a scent, a memory, can carry you further into rest than any spectacle. Perfume was not only worn. It was eaten, drunk, savored. It was nourishment as well as adornment. And in that, it was perhaps closest to what we still seek today, the blending of comfort, beauty, and care, all in a single breath. If rosewater pastries and orange blossom cordials sound delightful, there were also stranger, more surprising flavors at the tables of 17th century France. For in this era, the boundary between what belonged on the body and what belonged on the tongue was blurred. Perfume ingredients crept into feasts, turning meals into something both luxurious and peculiar. One of the most curious was ambergris. We have already met it as the treasure of the sea, the whale's strange gift. But beyond the perfumer's vial, ambergris found its way into kitchens. Imagine a custard, smooth and golden, flavored not only with sugar and cream, but with a tiny shaving of ambergris dissolved within. To us, the thought may seem odd, eating something from a whale's belly, but to the nobles of France, it was the height of refinement. The taste was described as musky, sweet, faintly oceanic, like the memory of the sea folded into dessert. Ambergris even appeared in drinks. It could be dissolved into hot chocolate, a new and fashionable beverage at court. Picture a steaming cup, dark and rich, spiced with cinnamon, sweetened with sugar, and laced with a hint of ambergris. Each sip heavy, warming, and perfumed, filling both mouth and air with its musk. Chocolate itself was exotic, imported from the Americas, and to pair it with ambergris was to create a potion of double luxury, a drink fit for kings. Musk, too, crossed the line from perfume to plate. Recipes survive for sweetmeats flavored with musk, tiny confections that carried the same earthy, animalic warmth found in perfumes. Imagine biting into sugared almonds or candied fruits and tasting, beneath the sweetness, a subtle muskiness that lingered long after. To our palates, it might seem jarring, even unpleasant. But to theirs, it was indulgence, proof of sophistication. Musk was not merely worn, it was swallowed, a sign of daring refinement. Civet, while less common in food, still appeared occasionally. A recipe might call for a drop of civet in syrup or a trace folded into a sauce. The effect was strong, unmistakable, and not everyone approved. Satirists joked about nobles eating as strangely as they perfumed themselves. Yet, the very shock of such flavors made them fashionable for a time. To serve a dish flavored with civet or musk was to show not only wealth, but boldness. Other perfumed delicacies were gentler. Candied violets, sugared rose petals, crystallized orange blossoms. These were easier for us to imagine. Flowers preserved in sugar, their perfume intact, eaten as fragile sweets. A lady might nibble a sugared violet at the end of supper, the petal dissolving on her tongue, leaving behind a faint floral trace. These confections were not only desserts but gifts, tokens exchanged between lovers, as delicate as whispered words. Spiced wines and cordials carried perfumes, too. A cordial might be infused with lavender, a warming drink meant to calm nerves. Wine might be steeped with cloves and cinnamon, then brightened with a splash of orange blossom water. Even brandy could be scented with rose. To drink was not only to taste, but to inhale. Each sip carried perfume into the body, warming, soothing, intoxicating. Imagine a banquet table at Versailles. Roasted pheasant, its skin glazed with orange blossom syrup. Custards laced with ambergris. Pastries dusted with violet sugar. Bowls of candied fruit glowing like jewels. Cups of spiced wine steaming. The air filled with cinnamon, rose, and musk. To sit at such a table was to be surrounded by fragrance in every form. Eaten, drunk, worn, and inhaled. And yet, these luxuries were not for everyone. To eat ambergris or musk was to declare one's wealth. Such ingredients were rare, expensive, and mysterious. A drop of ambergris in custard might cost more than a servant earned in months. To taste it was to taste privilege itself. The guest who lifted their spoon knew that they were not simply eating dessert. They were participating in a ritual of status. It is fascinating to think how taste itself changes across time. Today, we might wrinkle our noses at the idea of musk in almonds or ambergris in chocolate. But to the courtiers of France, these were wonders. Much as we might delight in truffle or saffron today, ingredients once strange, now beloved, they adored their perfumes on the plate. Perhaps it reminds us that taste is always relative. What seems odd in one century may seem luxurious in another. And even if we would not eat civet-laced custard now, we can still admire the daring of those who did, the way they blurred the senses, turning every meal into a fragrant performance. Imagine, for a moment, sitting at that table. You lift a silver spoon to your lips. The custard is creamy, the sugar sweet, but beneath it all is something else, a musky warmth, a whisper of the sea, a faint trace of the exotic. You close your eyes, and the flavor lingers, mysterious, strange, unforgettable. You are not simply eating. You are dreaming with your mouth, tasting perfume itself. And perhaps, in the quiet of your own room now, you feel a similar comfort. That the boundaries between scent and taste, between memory and dream, are never so solid. That a single aroma, a single sip, can carry you farther than miles of travel. Perfume was not only worn, not only burned, but eaten. A banquet was not only feast, but fragrance. And in this mingling, life itself became richer, stranger, more enchanted. So as we pause here, rest in the thought of sugared violets, of ambergris custard, of spiced wine glowing in candlelight. Let the strangeness soothe you. Let the sweetness soften you. Let the invisible feast carry you further into dream. When perfume drifted from the kitchens into the great festivals of France, it became something more than flavor, more than scent. It became spectacle. Meals were no longer simply meals, they were theater. Banquets turned into fragrant performances. Each dish, each sip, each whiff of air designed to dazzle guests and overwhelm their senses. Imagine Versailles during a grand celebration. The gardens alive with torchlight, the fountains splashing in rhythmic music of their own. Inside, in the banquet hall, long tables stretch endlessly, piled high with dishes that glisten beneath crystal chandeliers. Roasted birds, candied fruits, pies with golden crusts, and everywhere, the air humming with perfumes, rose, cinnamon, musk, orange blossom. To eat here was to enter a play. A roasted peacock might be brought forth, its feathers spread like a fan, its meat scented with cloves. A pastry might arrive shaped like a castle, with sugared violets pressed into its turrets, each bite both sweet and perfumed. Even the table decorations joined in, bowls of flowers, trays of spices, dishes perfumed with rosewater mist. Some meals were staged outdoors, in the perfumed gardens themselves. Imagine guests seated under orange trees heavy with blossom, while servants carried in dishes flavored with those very same flowers. The boundary between setting and meal dissolved. You did not only see the garden, you ate it, drank it, inhaled it. The very air became part of the feast. The fountains joined, too. Records tell of fountains that sprayed rosewater during festivals, so that guests were misted lightly as they strolled past. Picture it, laughter rising, music drifting, and a cool mist of roses settling on your skin. A fountain not of water, but of perfume. The world itself scented for celebration. Even fireworks were paired with fragrance. Smoke from torches soaked in resin and spice added sweetness to the sky as bursts of color lit the night. Imagine the scent of pine and clove drifting upward with sparks, as if the stars themselves had been perfumed. At these banquets, guests did not simply eat, they experienced. They walked through air that carried roses. They sipped wines that carried cinnamon. They nibbled pastries that carried orange blossom. They wore gloves that carried musk. Every sense overlapped until the entire world seemed spun from perfume. And what of the smaller festivals, the less formal ones? Even in towns beyond Versailles, perfume made its way into celebrations. Market squares might be decorated with garlands of herbs, rosemary, lavender, thyme. Fires scented with juniper or pine added fragrance to the air. Cakes flavored with rosewater were sold in stalls, alongside candied almonds dusted with cinnamon. The nobility may have perfected the art of perfumed feasts, but the idea spread far and wide. In this way, perfume became not only personal, but communal. A single sachet or glove belonged to one person, but a fountain of rosewater? A bonfire scented with resin? These belonged to everyone who walked nearby. Entire crowds were enveloped, lulled, and enchanted. It's soothing to imagine, isn't it? A festival where the air itself is gentle, where the smells of smoke and sweat and crowds are softened by lavender garlands and perfumed fires. Where celebration is not only seen and heard, but inhaled. Even everyday celebrations, weddings, christenings, saints' days, were marked with perfume. Cakes flavored with orange blossom water, wine warmed with spices, incense curling in churches. Perfume was woven into joy as naturally as music or flowers. It was the invisible ribbon tying feasts together, binding memory with scent. And when the night grew late, when the torches dimmed and the music slowed, perfume lingered. The tables cleared, the dishes carried away, the guests departed, but the air remained fragrant. The memory of rosewater fountains, spiced wine, sugared violets hung quietly, like a dream that refuses to fade upon waking. Perhaps that is the truest magic of these festivals, the way perfume extended joy beyond its moment. A guest might wake the next morning and still taste rose on their lips, still smell cinnamon on their sleeve. The feast lived on, carried invisibly, woven into memory. As you imagine yourself there, perhaps you feel it, too. Sitting at a long table, the candlelight flickering. You lift a pastry to your lips, sugared with violets. You sip wine steeped with cloves. You turn your head, and a fountain mists you with roses. The air is heavy, sweet, almost intoxicating. You close your eyes, and for a moment, the world itself seems perfumed. And then, gently, you exhale. The feast fades, the festival dims, but the memory lingers, quiet and soothing. Perfume in feasts was never only about extravagance. It was about creating memories, about binding celebration to the senses, so that joy could be carried long after the candles went out. So as we pause at the close of this part, hold that thought with you, that the sweetest memories are often scented. That joy, like perfume, lingers invisibly, guiding us long after the moment has passed. We have wandered through the great halls of Versailles, where perfumes perfumed fountains and ambergris flavored custards. But beyond those gilded walls, ordinary people also sought out fragrance, though in simpler, humbler ways. For perfume in food was not only the privilege of kings. Even in villages and towns, in kitchens with soot-darkened beams and clay floors, fragrance found its place. Imagine a small kitchen in provincial France. The hearth glows with coals, a pot hangs simmering over the fire. A woman lifts a wooden spoon, stirs the stew, then reaches for a small bundle of herbs tied with twine. Rosemary, thyme, maybe lavender too. She drops it into the pot, the steam rising fragrant, filling the room. This was their perfume, culinary, practical, yet still soothing. The air became gentler, the food richer, the home warmer. Lavender, so adored at court, was also beloved in cottages. Not for sugared violets or candied petals, but for flavoring honey, for steeping in teas, for calming children at night. A farmer's wife might stir lavender into a simple syrup, then drizzle it over bread. A shepherd might carry dried sprigs in his pouch, chewing them for freshness while tending flocks. Perfume was not only luxury, it was everyday comfort, as humble as the herbs growing by the door. Rosewater, too, filtered into kitchens beyond Versailles. Apothecaries sold it not only as medicine, but as flavoring. Housewives sprinkled it onto cakes or stirred it into drinks. Imagine a village feast, long tables in the open air, bread torn and passed, a cake brought forth, its sweetness lifted with rose water. It was not ambergris custard, no, but it carried fragrance all the same, a thread connecting the humblest meal to the grandest banquet. Spices were rarer for common folk, yet not absent. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove were expensive, but a pinch might be bought for festivals, for weddings, for holidays. A family might save carefully to purchase a little pouch, to transform a plain dish into something extraordinary. A stew with clove, a cake with cinnamon, a toast with spiced wine. These rare moments of fragrance were treasured, remembered for years. Street vendors, too, offered simple perfumed delights. In Paris, one might buy candied nuts dusted with cinnamon or honey cakes flavored with rose. The aromas drifted down the narrow streets, drawing customers as surely as sight or sound. Imagine walking through a crowded market, the smell of roasted chestnuts mingling with rose-scented sweets, each corner offering another little pocket of perfume. Children learned these flavors early. A sugared violet given as a treat, a sip of warm wine with orange peel at a festival, a piece of bread drizzled with honey steeped in lavender. These small indulgences became memories, carried quietly into adulthood. For even the poorest lives held moments of sweetness, moments where perfume touched the tongue. Of course, not every fragrance was welcome. The streets themselves carried their own strong perfumes, less pleasant ones. The scent of horses, markets, waste, smoke. Against these, the fragrant cake, the spiced wine, the rosewater drink became not just luxury, but relief. To taste sweetness was to escape, if only for a while, from the harsher air of the city. I like to imagine a festival day in a small town. The square filled with music and laughter. Garlands of herbs strung across stalls. Women selling cakes sprinkled with rose sugar. Men pouring spiced wine into wooden cups. Children running with sticky fingers from candied nuts. The air alive not with ambergris and musk, but with cinnamon, rose, honey, and lavender. A simpler perfume, perhaps, but no less enchanting. And in homes, in quiet evenings, families made their own fragrant remedies. A pot of milk warmed with nutmeg for sleep. A tisane of chamomile and lavender for nerves. Bread flavored with rosemary for feasts. These scents and tastes soothed the body and spirit alike. Perfume was not only for kings. It lived in the cupboards of ordinary kitchens, tucked into jars, tied in bundles, steeped in pots. Perhaps this is the most comforting thought of all, that even in a world divided by wealth, fragrance united. The nobles may have eaten ambergris custards, but the villagers, too, knew the sweetness of rosewater cakes. The courtiers may have sipped musk-laced wine, but the shepherd carried lavender sprigs. Perfume crossed boundaries, softened differences, carried comfort to both palace and cottage. And as you rest here, you might feel that same thread. Whether in the faint scent of tea, the warmth of a candle, the sweetness of spice in food, fragrance still weaves into daily life. Humble or grand, unnoticed but always present. So let us linger in this thought, that even in the simplest of kitchens, with smoke curling from the hearth and children gathered at the table, perfume found its way. Not as spectacle, not as power, but as comfort. A spoon of lavender honey, a sip of spiced milk, a cake kissed with rose. Perfume was not only for Versailles. It lived in the everyday. And perhaps that is where its truest magic has always belonged. Perfume in food was more than indulgence. It was memory, intimacy, and comfort woven invisibly into taste. Just as a sachet of lavender tucked into a pillow could bring sleep, a cake flavored with rose water could bring joy long after it was eaten. Scent and flavor lingered, not only on the tongue, but in the heart. Imagine a young girl in a small French village, given her first sugared violet at a festival. The petal, fragile and sweet, melts on her tongue. The taste is fleeting, but the memory lasts. Every spring thereafter, the scent of violets carries her back to that moment of joy. Or picture a courtier at Versailles sipping ambergris-laced chocolate, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. Years later, the memory of that musky sweetness lingers, tied forever to the night of music and laughter when he first tasted it. Perfumed foods were often shared as tokens of affection. A lover might gift candied orange blossoms, fragile and fragrant, as a sign of sweetness and devotion. A letter sealed with violet sugar spoke of intimacy beyond words. To give someone a perfumed treat was to give them not just flavor, but feeling, a piece of one's presence, lingering long after the gift was gone. There is something timeless in this. Even today, we associate flavors with love. A favorite dessert baked by a partner. A warm drink shared in winter. The fragrance of cinnamon or vanilla in a kitchen filled with laughter. The people of the 17th century were no different. For them, rosewater, lavender, or cinnamon carried the same power. To eat perfumed food was to feel cared for, comforted, connected. Perfume also shaped the intimacy of memory. Families gathered around tables, eating spiced breads and cakes, carried those flavors into their lives. A son grown to manhood might recall the lavender syrup his mother drizzled over bread. A daughter, married and gone, might think of the rose-flavored custards of her childhood. Food, like perfume, tied lives together, binding memory in invisible threads. At night, perfumed foods carried into dreams. A sip of warm milk flavored with nutmeg, believed to bring calm sleep. A tisane of orange blossom water, said to soothe the heart and ease the mind. Children falling asleep after sugared almonds might dream sweeter dreams, their breath carrying faint traces of spice into the night. Perfume was not only inhaled, it was swallowed, digested, turned into the very body itself. Even in grief, perfume in food offered solace. At funerals, cakes flavored with spice and rose were served, comforting the mourners with sweetness. At weddings, candied violets and spiced wine celebrated union. At births, mothers were given perfumed cordials to strengthen them. Life itself was punctuated by fragrance, tasted as well as smelled. And in the great courts, where every feast was designed as performance, perfume in food reinforced power. The guests who ate ambergris custard or musk-scented almonds were not just indulging. They were participating in the king's world, inhaling and swallowing the very symbols of his wealth. The memory lingered long after, binding them to the magnificence of the Sun King. But perhaps the truest power of perfume in food was quieter. A child remembering lavender honey, a villager recalling spiced wine at a festival, a noblewoman nibbling sugared roses and thinking of the gardens in spring. These were small moments, tender and human, where fragrance became memory. And here, as we close this chapter, you might let your own memories rise softly. Think of a flavor tied to a memory, a cake, a drink, a spice. Cinnamon in winter, vanilla in summer, mint in tea. The memory lingers not because of taste alone, but because of the fragrance that carried it, invisible and strong. Perfume in food, in 17th century France, was not merely fashion. It was the weaving of memory into flavor, the blending of intimacy into sweetness. It was a feast not only for the body, but for the heart and spirit. So let yourself rest now, as though you had just finished such a feast. The candles burn low. The air carries faint traces of rose and cinnamon. The last sip of spiced wine warms your chest. The memory of sugared violets softens your thoughts. You close your eyes, and the fragrance carries you gently into dreams. Perfume was not only worn or inhaled, it was tasted, shared, remembered. It lived in feasts and festivals, in kitchens and chambers, in the simplest breads and the richest custards. It lived in the heart as much as on the tongue. And now, with the feasts of France behind us, we will step into the next stage of our journey. For perfume did not stop at food or fashion. It touched celebrations, faith, and even politics, woven invisibly into the very structures of life. But for tonight, let the thought of sweet, perfumed delicacies linger. Sugared roses, ambergris chocolate, spiced wine glowing in candlelight. A fragrant dream to guide you softly into rest. Chapter 5. Sacred Scents and Invisible Prayers. Perfume did not belong only to the banquet hall or the bedchamber. In 17th century France, it drifted upward into the vaulted ceilings of churches, curling into sacred rituals, mingling with prayer and devotion. Fragrance became not only a pleasure of the body, but a language of the spirit. Step with me now into a stone cathedral in Paris, the year perhaps 1650. The air is cool, hushed, heavy with shadows. Candles flicker against pillars, their light trembling like small stars. And rising steadily above the silence is smoke, incense, curling from bronze censers swung by priests. Frankincense, myrrh, and benzoin fill the vast space, their sweetness mixed with a sharp, resinous edge. You breathe it in, and suddenly the world outside, the noisy streets, the markets, the smells of daily life, fades away. The incense is a wall, an invisible curtain, lifting the spirit upward. For centuries, incense had been part of Christian ritual, and in 17th century France, it remained central. The faithful believed that as the smoke rose, so too did their prayers. Perfume became visible, tangible prayer, an offering carried upward on fragrance. It was not mere ornament. It was devotion. And beyond the great cathedrals, smaller chapels and parish churches also held their scents. A village church might burn rosemary or juniper instead of costly frankincense. The smoke would still curl upward, mingling with hymns, wrapping the worshippers in a scented shroud of reverence. Even the simplest herbs, when burned, became holy through ritual. Perfume entered personal devotion, too. Holy water was sometimes scented with rose or lavender, making the sign of the cross both purifying and fragrant. Priests used scented oils for anointing the sick, blending faith with comfort. Imagine lying ill, afraid, and having lavender oil brushed gently onto your forehead. The scent calms, the ritual reassures. Whether the cure was real or imagined mattered less than the peace it gave. Even funerals carried perfume. Incense burned beside coffins, flowers scattered with rosewater, the dead wrapped in linens sprinkled with herbs. To mask decay? Yes, but also to offer dignity, to to perfume the passage from life to death. In this way, perfume touched not only celebrations but grief, binding fragrance to every stage of life. Perfume also carried deep symbolism. Frankincense and myrrh, brought by the Magi to the infant Christ, echoed through every censer. To smell them in a church was to be reminded of Scripture, of sacred gifts, of divine presence. To burn them was to reenact holy story in smoke and scent. But sacred scent was not only about incense. It shaped the architecture of devotion itself. Churches were built with soaring ceilings, so the smoke could rise like a visible river. Windows were placed to catch the light, making the drifting incense glow as though touched by heaven. Perfume became part of the theater of faith, invisible yet essential. And in homes, private devotion carried fragrance, too. A mother might keep a small vial of rose water beside her prayer book, dabbing it as she whispered prayers at night. A father might burn a sprig of rosemary in the hearth as he recited evening psalms. Even the poor could gather wild herbs, hang them above doors, and believe their fragrance kept away evil. There was, too, a superstition in sacred scent. People believed incense purified the air, driving out sickness as well as sin. A fumigated church was thought safer, its perfumed smoke acting as shield. Processions during times of plague often burned incense in the streets, the smoke drifting into homes, meant to guard entire towns. The faith in perfume was both spiritual and practical, woven together in every breath. Think of how soothing that must have felt. To walk into a church filled with fragrant smoke, to hear chants rising, candles glowing, and to believe you were safe. Perfume became not only prayer, but peace. A peace that wrapped body and spirit alike. Even the monasteries had their fragrant rituals. Monks tended herb gardens, growing lavender, sage, and rosemary. These herbs perfumed not only medicines and kitchens, but also chapels. Imagine a cloister at dawn, the stone damp, the air cool, the herbs brushed by wind. The scent rises softly, blending with chants. A natural perfume, made holy by devotion. In this way, perfume bridged the human and the divine. The body inhaled what the spirit believed. The nose became a channel for faith. Invisible, intangible, yet powerful. And as you rest here now, perhaps you feel a little of that same peace. Imagine the hush of the cathedral, the glow of candles, the slow drift of smoke. The scent of frankincense, sharp, sweet, resinous, curling upward into silence. You breathe in, and for a moment, the world softens. Perfume was not only for courts and feasts. It was prayer. It was healing. It was the invisible presence that turned stone into sanctuary, ritual into comfort. So as we close this part, hold that thought gently. That fragrance, whether humble rosemary or rare frankincense, has always been more than smell. It has been connection between people, between memory, between earth and heaven itself. And in the next part, we'll walk further into this sacred perfume, seeing how it shaped rituals of life and death, binding every stage of existence with invisible sweetness. Perfume did not only linger in churches and chapels. It followed people through the great passages of life, woven into rituals from the cradle to the grave. Each stage, birth, marriage, death, was marked not only by words and gestures, but by fragrance. Perfume was the invisible witness to life's most profound moments. Let us begin with birth. In noble households, the arrival of a child was celebrated with both fear and joy. Survival was never guaranteed, and so prayers, rituals, and comforts surrounded mother and child. Perfume was part of this circle. The chamber might be fumigated with herbs, rosemary, juniper, lavender, to purify the air and keep away illness. Rose water was sprinkled on linens, its coolness thought to calm the body and the spirit. The midwife might anoint the mother's temples with scented oil, a mixture of lavender and myrrh, believed to strengthen her during labor. And when the child was born, small touches of fragrance welcomed it. Rose water dabbed gently on its swaddling cloth. A sprig of rosemary hung nearby as protection. Sometimes, ambergris was even mixed into remedies for the newborn, thought to fortify health. These scents, mingled with the warmth of the chamber, became the child's first introduction to the world, a soft cloud of perfume announcing life. Marriages, too, were perfumed affairs. The church itself filled with incense, frankincense, and myrrh curling upward during vows. The bride often carried a pomander or bouquet of fragrant herbs: rosemary for fidelity, orange blossom for purity, lavender for devotion. Perfume clung to her gown, her gloves, her veil. The groom might wear gloves scented with musk or rose, each handshake leaving a fragrant trace. At the feast afterward, the scents of food and perfume mingled: rosewater cakes, spiced wines, candied violets. Guests carried sachets as tokens, small bags filled with fragrant herbs, given as favors. Imagine the hall filled not only with music and laughter, but with a soft orchestra of scents: cinnamon, rose, lavender, clove, binding memory to celebration. For years afterward, the smell of orange blossom or spiced wine might carry a couple back to their wedding day. Perfume was intimacy in marriage, too. Lovers exchanged perfumed letters, sachets filled with violets or rose petals, gloves scented with ambergris. To carry the fragrance of one's beloved was to carry their presence. Perfume became the invisible thread of love, lingering even in absence. A drop of rose water on a handkerchief, tucked into a pocket, whispered of devotion without a single word. And then, as all lives must, perfume accompanied death. In death chambers, herbs were burned to mask odors and to purify the air. Rosemary, thyme, and lavender were most common, their sharp sweetness thought to drive away decay. Rose water was sprinkled on the body, giving dignity to the deceased. Coffins were lined with herbs, sachets tucked among linens. Funeral processions burned incense in the streets, the smoke drifting upward as bells tolled. In churches, frankincense and myrrh rose above prayers for the dead, carrying the soul upward in invisible clouds. To breathe the smoke was to join in farewell, to share in grief. Perfumes softened sorrow, making the final passage more bearable. Even graves carried scent. Flowers, roses, lilies, rosemary, were laid not only for beauty but for their fragrance. As though the living could send one final perfume into the earth, a message of remembrance carried on the air. In this way, perfume bound the milestones of life together: birth, marriage, death, all perfumed, all marked by invisible threads. A newborn swaddled in rose water, a bride crowned with orange blossoms, a coffin fumigated with rosemary. Fragrance was the constant, the quiet companion through joy and sorrow alike. And perhaps it is not so strange. Perfume, after all, is fleeting, like life itself. A scent cannot be held. It drifts, lingers, fades. To use it at life's milestones was to mirror the human condition: beautiful, powerful, but transient. In perfume, people saw themselves reflected. Imagine now, as you rest, walking through a life in scent: the sweetness of rose announcing birth, the brightness of orange blossoms celebrating marriage, the sharpness of rosemary bidding farewell and death. A whole life carried invisibly, softly, through perfume. There is a calmness in this thought, a reminder that fragrance ties us not only to memory, but to meaning. To breathe in lavender or rose is to join a long chain of people who, centuries ago, did the same, marking their lives with scent. Perfume was never only fashion or luxury. It was ritual, memory, and prayer. It was how people carried themselves through life's greatest thresholds. And so, as this part closes, let your breath deepen gently. Inhale slowly. Imagine rosewater, orange blossoms, rosemary. Exhale softly. Let them drift away, as fleeting and beautiful as life itself. Perfume, the invisible companion, has always been there. From the cradle to the grave, from laughter to tears, it carried comfort. And in the next part, we will wander into the sacred calendar itself: how festivals, holy days, and processions were perfumed, weaving fragrance into the rhythm of the year. The sacred calendar of 17th century France was filled with days of ritual and celebration, and at each turn of the year, fragrance played its part. Perfume was not reserved for kings or nobles alone. It belonged to the church, to the people, to the rhythm of time itself. Holy days were perfumed days. Imagine Easter morning in a Parisian church. The bells toll, echoing through the stone arches. Candles blaze on the altar, their flames steady against the cool dawn air. And as the choir sings, incense rises from golden censers, swinging slowly, their chains clinking softly. The smoke is thick, sweet, and resinous, frankincense mixed with myrrh. It fills the church until the light itself seems perfumed, the air transformed into something both earthly and divine. Worshippers breathe it in, believing their prayers ride upward with the smoke. Easter becomes not only sight and sound, but scent, etched into memory through invisible sweetness. On Corpus Christi, processions wound through the streets, and perfume came outdoors. Streets were strewn with herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender. The very ground became fragrant. As the procession passed, the footsteps of priests and townsfolk crushed the herbs, releasing sharp green aromas into the air. Children tossed petals of roses and lilies, their fragrance mingling with hymns and incense. Imagine walking in such a procession, each step releasing scent beneath your feet, each breath filled with rosemary and roses, as though the earth itself had joined the prayer. At Christmas, too, fragrance reigned. Churches burned pine and juniper, filling the cold air with resinous smoke. The nativity scenes were surrounded with herbs, garlands of rosemary and holly. In homes, mulled wine scented with cloves and cinnamon warmed the evenings. The entire season smelled of spice and evergreen, each note tied to joy and memory. To smell cinnamon was to think of Christmastide, just as to smell pine was to think of winter devotion. Even saints' days carried their own perfumes. St. John's Day in midsummer brought bonfires, and with them, herbs thrown into the flames. Lavender, sage, and fennel crackled, releasing fragrance into the summer night. Villagers gathered around, singing, dancing, breathing in the scented smoke. The bonfire became not only warmth and light, but perfume, marking the turning of the seasons with invisible ritual. The church understood the power of these scents. Incense was not merely decoration. It sanctified spaces, marked transitions, drew boundaries between sacred and profane. A room filled with fragrance became holy. A procession scented with herbs became divine. Perfume was invisible architecture, shaping spaces as surely as stone and wood. And the people believed in its power. A fumigated church was thought purer, safer, its air cleansed of sickness. A procession with herbs was thought to carry blessings into every home along its path. Perfume was not only beauty, it was protection, healing, blessing. But festivals were also moments of joy, and perfume joined in that, too. Imagine a town fair held on a saint's day. Stalls filled with honey cakes flavored with rosewater, mugs of spiced wine, candied almonds dusted with cinnamon, garlands of herbs strung across stalls. Perfume drifted from kitchens, from fires, from sachets tucked into sleeves. The sacred and the joyful mingled, each reinforcing the other. To eat rosewater cake at a saint's feast was to taste devotion itself. Children grew up with these scents marking the seasons. A boy might remember the smell of rosemary crushed underfoot during Corpus Christi. A girl might recall the clove-scented wine her family drank at Christmas. Perfume became the calendar of memory, the invisible clock by which life was measured. And perhaps it is worth pausing here to reflect on how fragrance marks our lives even now. Cinnamon and pine for winter, fresh grass and flowers for spring, the smell of the sea for summer, wood smoke for autumn. Scent binds us to time, reminding us where we are in the year, carrying us gently forward. For the people of 17th century France, this connection was even stronger. Perfume was their calendar. Incense for Easter, herbs for Corpus Christi, pine for Christmas, lavender for midsummer. Each holiday had its fragrance, and each fragrance carried not only joy but devotion. Picture now a midsummer evening. The sun has set, but the sky still glows faintly. A bonfire crackles, sparks rising into the warm night air. Villagers gather, laughter and song drifting upward. Someone tosses lavender into the flames. It hisses, releases its sharp, sweet aroma. For a moment, the entire square is perfumed, the fire carrying fragrance into the night. You breathe it in, and it feels both sacred and joyous, a perfume that binds heaven and earth, body and spirit. Perfume gave holy days their texture, their invisible weight. To celebrate without it would have been unthinkable. It was as necessary as candles, as bells, as song. So as you rest now, let yourself imagine walking through the sacred year in scent. Easter with frankincense, Corpus Christi with rosemary underfoot, Christmas with cinnamon and pine, midsummer with lavender in the fire. Each breath carrying devotion, each fragrance tying memory to the divine. Perfume was not only sacred in ritual, but in rhythm, in the passing of seasons, the turning of time, the shaping of memory. And as we close this part, hold that thought, that the year itself was perfumed, each day marked not only by prayers and songs, but by fragrance drifting invisibly, as faithful as any prayer. Perfume in the sacred world of 17th century France was not always made by human hands. Sometimes it was believed to come from heaven itself. For centuries, stories spread of saints and holy relics that gave off miraculous fragrances, scents too sweet and pure to belong to this world. These odors of sanctity became powerful signs of divine presence, filling the imagination of the faithful. Imagine entering a small chapel where a saint's relic is displayed. The air is heavy with incense. Yes, but beneath it there is something else, a sweetness, gentle yet unmistakable, drifting from the relic itself. Pilgrims believed this fragrance was proof of holiness. A body that did not decay, but instead gave off roses or lilies, was said to be blessed. To inhale it was to breathe in a fragment of heaven. In 17th century France, such stories carried weight. The faithful flocked to shrines where relics were said to emit perfume. The bones of saints, the garments they had worn, even the places where they had prayed, all were believed capable of releasing invisible sweetness. This was not ordinary perfume, but miraculous scent, a gift of God. The odor of sanctity was described in many ways. Sometimes it was like roses blooming in winter. Sometimes like lilies, pure and clean. Sometimes like incense, sharp and holy. The common thread was its persistence, a fragrance that lingered long after the body should have faded, an aroma that seemed to defy time. To smell it was to stand on the threshold between earth and heaven. One story told of a French nun whose cell, after her death, filled with the smell of violets. Another of a saint whose body, when exhumed, released a perfume so strong that even those outside the church could smell it. These tales were recorded not only as wonders, but as evidence, fragrance used as proof of sanctity. Perfume also clung to miracles. Holy wells scented with roses. Icons said to weep fragrant oil. Pilgrims carried away cloths touched to relics, believing the perfume would remain as a blessing. In this way, fragrance became part of the language of faith, a sign of the divine breaking into the ordinary. It is soothing to imagine how such experiences must have felt. To enter a church, weary from travel, burdened with cares, and to suddenly inhale the sweetness of roses where no roses were. To believe, for a moment, that heaven had opened and left its trace in fragrance. Whether miraculous or imagined, the comfort would have been real. Even outside miracles, fragrance was tied to relics through ritual. When relics were carried in procession, incense filled the streets, blending with flowers scattered on the ground. The relic and the perfume became inseparable, the visible and the invisible, the earthly and the heavenly. To see the relic was to see faith. To smell the incense was to feel it. Theologians of the time wrote about these odors, debating whether they were physical or spiritual. Were they truly in the air or in the soul? Did God create the fragrance directly, or was it simply a sign perceived by the faithful? These questions lingered, unanswered, but the belief remained. For ordinary people, the explanation mattered less than the experience. They inhaled, they believed, they felt peace. Perfume, in this sense, was both metaphor and miracle. The sweet odor of sanctity symbolized purity, devotion, and closeness to God. Just as incense lifted prayers, so miraculous fragrance lifted spirits, reassuring the faithful that holiness was real, tangible, alive. And perhaps there is something calming in this idea, even now. That fragrance can carry meaning beyond itself. That the smell of roses, or incense, or lavender might, in a quiet moment, feel like more than just scent. It might feel like presence, like comfort, like something greater than words. Imagine, now, standing in a chapel lit by candles. The stone walls are cool, the air hushed. Before you rests a reliquary, gleaming with gold and glass. You bow your head, close your eyes, and then you smell it. Sweet, soft, unexpected. A fragrance with no clear source, rising gently into your breath. You inhale, and the weight of the world eases. Whether miracle or not, it feels holy. In this way, perfume carried faith into the senses. It was not only heard in chants or seen in candles. It was inhaled, breathed, absorbed into the body. Perfume became prayer itself, lingering long after the words faded. This blending of perfume and sanctity shaped how people saw holiness. To smell sweetness where none should be was to believe in grace. To carry a scented relic was to carry blessing. To dream of roses or violets was to believe in the nearness of God. So as we pause at the close of this part, rest in this thought, that perfume has always been more than scent. It has been memory, devotion, comfort. For some, it was even miracle, the invisible touch of heaven, breathed into the soul. And in the next part, we will finish this chapter by exploring how perfume shaped not only faith, but politics and power. How kings and clergy alike used fragrance to rule both body and spirit. Perfume in the sacred world of 17th century France was not only for prayer and miracles. It was also for power. The invisible threads of fragrance could be woven into authority, binding subjects to kings, worshippers to priests, and the people to their rulers. Scent was not neutral. It carried messages, both whispered and proclaimed. Consider the church. Incense was not simply pleasant. It was commanding. To step into a cathedral filled with smoke was to feel small, enveloped, humbled. The fragrance marked the space as holy, reminding all present of the authority of the church. Priests controlled not only the words of prayer, but the very air itself. Each swing of the censer filled lungs with obedience, faith inhaled as naturally as breath. The monarchy understood this well. Louis XIV, the Sun King, made fragrance part of his reign. Versailles itself was perfumed not just for beauty, but for message. Perfumed fountains, scented gloves, rosewater banquets, all declared his magnificence. Guests did not merely see his wealth, they inhaled it. To breathe at Versailles was to breathe in the king's glory. Even religious festivals, funded or supported by the crown, carried this blend of devotion and politics. When a procession wound through Paris streets with incense, herbs, and flowers, it was not only prayer, it was display. The crown and the church joined forces, perfuming the city to remind its people of their place within a greater order. Perfume, like banners and bells, became a symbol of unity under authority. In smaller ways, too, perfume carried control. Holy water scented with rose marked worshippers with devotion. Oils used in anointing tied the body itself to ritual, sealing obedience in fragrance. Even funerals of the powerful were stages of perfume. Incense filling the church, herbs lining the coffin, rosewater sprinkled on the grave. Authority lingered, perfumed, even in death. But perfume also worked subtly, almost invisibly. It softened resistance, lulled hearts, calmed minds. A ruler who perfumed a festival seemed generous, caring, divine. A church that filled the air with incense seemed closer to heaven. Authority was made fragrant, its weight softened into sweetness. There were satirists, of course, who mocked this. Pamphlets claimed the court stank of Civet and Musk, that priests hid corruption behind incense smoke. But even mockery admitted the truth. Perfume was powerful. To criticize it was to acknowledge its influence. Think of how carefully crafted this was. The scents chosen were never random. Frankincense, ancient and holy, tied the church to centuries of tradition. Orange blossom, sweet and pure, tied the king to the image of youth and fertility. Rosewater, gentle and cooling, tied rituals to mercy and compassion. Each note was selected for meaning, as carefully as words in a speech. And yet, beyond strategy, perfume still carried genuine comfort. A worshipper might feel soothed by incense, even if it also proclaimed the church's power. A courtier might feel calmed by rosewater, even if it also declared the king's magnificence. Perfume was both tool and gift, authority and intimacy, command and care. Imagine standing in a cathedral on a holy day. The incense rises, thick and sweet. The priest chants, the candles glow. You breathe it in, and you feel both devotion and awe. The church feels vast, eternal, unshakable. Now imagine walking through Versailles. The fountains mist with rose water, the air hums with orange blossoms, the courtiers smell of musk and jasmine. You breathe it in, and you feel the king's power, as though he has perfumed the very world around you. Invisible, yet undeniable, perfume created an atmosphere of authority, one that no subject could escape. To breathe was to participate, and perhaps, as you rest now, you can reflect on this curious paradox. Perfume was both freedom and control, both comfort and command. It softened sorrow, marked joy, carried devotion. But it also bound people to power, reminding them who ruled, who blessed, who held the keys to heaven and earth alike. Perfume was not only fashion, not only medicine, not only prayer. It was politics, woven into every breath, every ritual, every festival. It shaped not only memory but obedience, not only comfort but authority. And yet, for all its weight, perfume remained fleeting. A festival ended, incense smoke faded, rosewater dried. Authority itself was made fragile, its fragrance vanishing as surely as it appeared. Perhaps this was perfume's truest lesson, that even the greatest powers could be as fleeting as scent, lingering only in memory. So as we close this chapter, let yourself breathe slowly, deeply. Imagine incense curling upward, rosewater mist drifting, orange blossoms blooming in the air. You inhale, and with it, you hold centuries of devotion, power, memory, and prayer. Perfume was always more than scent. It was invisible command, sacred comfort, political theater, and human hope, all blended together, carried on the air, breathed into life. And in the next chapter, we will step into an even stranger space, where perfume touched not only ritual and food, but fashion, gossip, and even scandal. For in 17th century France, fragrance could ruin reputations as easily as it could elevate them. Chapter 6. Sense of Society and Scandal. Perfume, for all its holiness and ritual, was also deeply social. In 17th century France, to smell of something was to say something, even when no words were spoken. In salons and at court, perfume became part of fashion, identity, and even reputation. It was not just a personal choice, it was public theater. Imagine stepping into a salon in Paris around 1670. The room glows with candlelight, the air thick with conversation and laughter. Gowns rustle, wigs nod, fans flutter. And beneath it all is an invisible cloud of fragrance, rising like a second layer of clothing. Rose mingles with musk, lavender with ambergris, orange blossom with civet. Each guest carries their own invisible garment, stitched not from silk, but from scent. For noble women, perfume was as necessary as lace or jewels. A gown without fragrance was incomplete. A fan without perfume was naked. Gloves were always scented, handkerchiefs sprinkled with rosewater, hair powdered with violet. To lean close to someone and leave behind a whisper of jasmine or musk was as deliberate as a bow or a glance. A lady's perfume could define her more than her words. For men, too, perfume carried weight. A gentleman might choose musk and ambergris, projecting strength and sensuality. Another might prefer lavender and orange blossom, aiming for refinement and elegance. Gloves perfumed with civet or clove made every gesture fragrant. Even letters carried scent, so that reputation drifted across distances long before the writer arrived. But as much as perfume elevated, it also invited risk. Too much musk, and one might be mocked for vulgarity. Too much civet, and satirists would sneer that you smelled like an animal. Too much rosewater, and one risked seeming frivolous. Perfume, like fashion itself, demanded balance. To wear it well was to show taste and sophistication. To wear it poorly was to become the subject of gossip. And gossip was everywhere. In pamphlets, in plays, in whispered conversations at court, people laughed about perfume as much as they admired it. Writers mocked courtiers who bathed themselves in civet, claiming the court smelled more like a menagerie than a palace. Satirists compared heavy musk to the odor of stables, or joked that noble women's letters carried more scent than scents. Perfume was invisible, but it could still stain reputations. At the same time, perfume became entangled with ideas of morality. A floral, Gentle perfume might signal purity, while heavier animalic notes suggested sensuality. A woman who wore jasmine might be admired for her refinement, but if her fragrance leaned too musky, whispers might suggest scandal. A man who favored ambergris might seem worldly and daring, but also arrogant or excessive. Perfume blurred lines, making reputations as much as it unmade them. This tension only added to its allure. To wear perfume was to play a game. It was to invite admiration and risk gossip. It was to send silent messages, invisible but unmistakable. A spritz of rosewater was innocence. A dab of musk was daring. A glove perfumed with clove was wit. A sachet of civet was danger. Each note was a sentence, written in air, read by everyone who breathed. And yet, beneath the risk and the satire, perfume still comforted. Even the most scandalous noble, mocked for their musk, still found solace in the sachet beneath their pillow. Even the most cautious lady, wary of gossip, still dusted her hair with violet powder. Perfume might ruin reputations, but it also soothed spirits. It was too essential, too comforting, to be abandoned. It is easy to imagine the contradictions. A nobleman mocked for smelling like civet, yet unable to attend court without it. A lady teased for her heavy rosewater, yet unwilling to enter a salon unscented. Perfume was both trap and treasure, a burden and a balm. Fashion itself grew entwined with perfume. Wigs carried powder, scented with orris root. Dresses were stored with sachets of lavender. Fans were perfumed so that every flutter carried fragrance. Even shoes might be scented, releasing perfume as their wearer walked across polished floors. The body became a stage, dressed not only in fabric but in fragrance. And the audience, courtiers, nobles, guests, was always aware. To sit in a salon was to inhale as much as to listen. To walk through Versailles was to breathe in layers of perfume, each person carrying their own signature note. Words mattered, yes, but so did air. As you rest in this thought, imagine yourself in that salon. The candles glow. The laughter hums. You bow, curtsy, gesture, and with each movement, your gloves release a faint trace of clove and musk. You lean closer to a friend, and your hair powders the air with violet. You pass by another, and their handkerchief whispers rosewater. The entire room is a tapestry of fragrance, stitched invisibly into the night. Perfume in 17th century society was not only accessory, it was identity. It was as essential as the wig, the fan, the lace collar. It was both risk and reward, gossip and grace. It could crown a reputation or crumble it, whisper innocence or shout scandal. And yet, for all its drama, it remained soothing, intimate, personal. At the end of the night, when the salon emptied, when the candles dimmed, perfume still lingered on handkerchiefs, on pillows, on letters. A private comfort, even after the public theater was done. So as we close this part, rest in the thought of perfume as society's invisible voice. Always present, always speaking, always shaping. Fragrance was not only pleasure. It was power, play, and sometimes peril. And in the next part, we will wander further into these entanglements, into the scandals, the rumors, the moments when perfume became not just fashion but controversy, shaping how people were remembered long after the air cleared. If perfume at court was fashion, it was also fuel for gossip. Invisible as it was, fragrance could cling to reputation more stubbornly than silk or lace. And in 17th century France, where appearances meant everything, even a whiff of excess could cause scandal. Imagine a grand salon at Versailles, the air already thick with perfume. A noblewoman enters, her gown shimmering, her fan fluttering delicately. But her fragrance precedes her, civet, heavy and animalic, saturating the air. Guests murmur behind their fans. Some swoon with admiration, claiming her daring is divine. Others wrinkle their noses, whispering that she smells more like a menagerie than a rose garden. In this way, perfume, meant to elevate, could also betray. Pamphleteers and satirists thrived on such stories. They wrote biting verses about courtiers who drowned themselves in musk, claiming the court was less a palace and more a perfumery. One joke claimed that to walk through Versailles was to smell more of civet cats than of roses. Perfume, they sneered, covered not elegance but corruption, masking moral decay with jasmine and clove. And yet, perfume was irresistible. Even those mocked for excess continued to wear it. Better to be gossiped about than to arrive unscented. A noble who walked into court without fragrance was half naked, stripped of their invisible attire. So the cycle continued. Laughter, excess, and scandal, all perfumed. There were darker whispers, too. Perfume was sometimes tied to suspicion and even fear. Poisonings were not uncommon in this age. The infamous Affair of the Poisons in the 1670s and 1680s revealed a web of fortune-tellers, poisoners, and even nobles accused of using powders and potions to eliminate rivals. Perfumes, with their powders and vials, became entangled in these fears. A vial of rosewater might conceal poison. A perfumed sachet might carry not comfort, but death. Imagine receiving a perfumed letter. You lift it to your face, inhale the scent of violets, and wonder, is it love or is it danger? The very invisibility of perfume made it suspect how easy it would be to hide a drop of venom in rose water, to disguise malice in fragrance. Satirists and playwrights delighted in this tension, spinning tales of nobles undone by poisoned perfumes, their vanity punished by invisible death. Even without poison, perfume could be accused of deceit. Some claimed it masked poor hygiene, turning filth into elegance. To critics, a nobleman perfumed with musk was not refined but rotten beneath his cloak. Perfume became a metaphor for hypocrisy, sweet on the outside, foul within. Plays mocked fops who wore more perfume than scents, who reeked of rosewater while their wit was as thin as smoke. Women, too, bore the brunt of gossip. A lady who wore strong perfume might be called vain, frivolous, even immoral. Heavy musk or civet was linked with sensuality, leading to whispers of scandal. A more delicate scent, rose, violet, lavender, was safer, signaling innocence and purity. In this way, perfume policed as well as adorned, guiding reputation like an invisible leash. And yet, perfume also gave women subtle power. A carefully chosen fragrance could attract, disarm, or distract. A letter scented with orange blossom could whisper tenderness more boldly than words. A sachet of musk tucked into a bodice could intrigue or unsettle. Perfume could be scandalous, yes, but it could also be strategic, a weapon of influence as much as lace or jewels. The line between admiration and scandal was always thin. Too much, and you were mocked. Too little, and you seemed careless. Too sensual, and you were whispered about. Too delicate, and you were dismissed. Perfume was a game, and every whiff mattered. It is soothing to reflect on this, in a way, to realize that even in a world so strict, fragrance remained playful, unpredictable, uncontrollable. Gossip clung to it, but so did joy. Scandal followed it, but so did comfort. Perfume was both dagger and embrace, capable of cutting and soothing in the same breath. And scandals did not stop perfume's rise. If anything, they made it more fascinating. Every whisper about excess, every joke about civet or musk, only deepened its allure. Perfume became dangerous, thrilling, irresistible. To wear it was to take a risk, and risks are always compelling. Imagine again that noblewoman, mocked for her civet. She enters the salon, whispers trailing her like perfume itself. Yet when she passes, heads still turn. Her scent lingers, unsettling, unforgettable. Scandal and fascination blur until they are one and the same. Perfume in society was never simple. It was elegance and deceit, power and peril, admiration and scandal. Invisible, but inescapable. Every breath carried meaning. So as you rest here, let your thoughts drift on that paradox. That the sweetest scents could cause the sharpest gossip. That what seemed delicate could conceal danger. That perfume, like life, was always double-edged, fragile yet powerful, fleeting yet unforgettable. And in the next part, we will wander further into these contradictions, exploring how perfume became part of art, theater, and literature, sometimes adored, sometimes mocked, always noticed. Perfume did not live only on the skin or in the salons of Versailles. It also slipped into art, into theater, into the wit of writers and poets. For in 17th century France, fragrance was not only a fashion, it was a symbol, a metaphor, a character on the stage of culture itself. In the theater, perfume often appeared as a joke. Playwrights loved to mock courtiers who drowned themselves in musk or fops who powdered their wigs with so much orris root that the audience could practically imagine sneezing along with them. A stock character might wave a perfumed handkerchief dramatically, fluttering it at every line, more in love with their own scent than with the plot. To the crowd, it was comedy, recognizable exaggeration of the courtiers they knew outside the theater. Perfume became a symbol of vanity, of pretension, of the foolishness of those who thought too highly of themselves. But perfume could also carry romance on stage. Lovers exchanged scented letters. Heroines swooned at the faintest whiff of a rose. Villains revealed themselves by the heavy animalic cloud of civet that followed them. Audiences understood these cues. Fragrance was shorthand for character. Pure roses for innocence, violets for devotion, musk for sensuality, clove for cunning. Without needing to explain, playwrights could let scent tell the story. Poetry, too, breathed perfume. Writers compared love to roses, devotion to violets, longing to jasmine at night. Perfume became the language of the heart, invisible but powerful, lingering long after words had faded. In sonnets and odes, the fragrance of flowers was never only fragrance. It was metaphor for desire, for faith, for memory. To describe a beloved as smelling of roses was not about hygiene, but about purity, beauty, grace. To compare a rival to Civet was insult enough to sting. Some poets even played with perfume's fleeting nature. They wrote of how scent, like love, could not be held, only breathed, only remembered. A rose fades, a sachet loses its strength, and so too do passions dim. Perfume became a reminder of the fragility of life, sweet and short-lived, vanishing into air. Painters captured perfume in subtler ways. A still life might show roses scattered on a table, or a crystal vial half full of amber liquid. The viewer could not smell the painting, but they knew what it meant. Roses suggested fleeting beauty, violets humility, lilies purity. A glass vial hinted at luxury, temptation, excess. Perfume became part of the visual language, as symbolic as fruit, as meaningful as light and shadow. Even in music, perfume lingered. Songs celebrated roses and orange blossoms, comparing them to love and longing. Courtly entertainments might include dancers scattering petals, filling the air with fragrance as music played. Perfume was both literal and symbolic, a background presence that audiences carried in their imaginations. But for all the romance and symbolism, satire never faded. Writers poked fun at courtiers who spent more on perfume than on scents, who cared more for rosewater than for honesty. Pamphlets joked that the court reeked of civet and corruption. Perfume was a symbol of decadence, an easy target for moralists who saw Versailles as shallow, vain, and excessive. And yet, even those who mocked perfume still described it in detail. They could not ignore it. Perfume was too present, too powerful, too much a part of daily life. To satirize it was to admit its importance. Perfume was everywhere, in salons, in theaters, in poems, in paintings. Invisible, but inescapable. Imagine now a night at the theater in Paris. The chandeliers glow, the crowd murmurs. Beside you, someone lifts a perfumed handkerchief, releasing rose water into the air. On stage, a foppish character waves his own scented glove, drawing laughter. A heroine sighs over a letter pressed with violet petals. The play ends, but the scent lingers in your memory, tied forever to the laughter and the music. Perfume has become part of the performance, part of the story. It is calming, in a way, to think of perfume as language. A wordless communication, understood by all, invisible yet vivid. A poet might write of roses, a playwright might mock civet, a painter might depict violets. Each is speaking in fragrance, a tongue carried through air and imagination alike. And so, as we pause at the close of this part, let us rest in that thought. That perfume was more than ornament. It was art. It was symbol. It was metaphor. It was a language that told stories, stirred laughter, carried romance, whispered warnings. Perfume was never silent, even though it had no voice. It spoke in plays and poems, in paintings and songs, in satire and in praise. Always present, always lingering, always shaping the imagination of 17th century France. And in the next part, we will drift into the private corners of society, into boudoirs and bedchambers, into the intimate ways perfume was tied to seduction, secrecy, and scandal behind closed doors. If perfume shaped salons, banquets, and theaters, it also lingered in quieter, more intimate spaces. Behind the gilded doors of Versailles, in the hushed corners of boudoirs and bedchambers, fragrance became part of seduction, secrecy, and whispered scandal. Imagine a candlelit chamber, its curtains drawn against the night. The fire burns low, its embers glowing red. On the dressing table sit vials and jars, rosewater, musk, violet powder, ambergris dissolved in spirits. The lady of the chamber leans forward, dabbing her wrists, brushing her hair with scented powder. Each movement is deliberate, each note chosen like a word in a secret language. For perfume here was not for the crowd, but for the single person who would lean close enough to breathe it. Lovers exchanged perfume as tokens. A sachet of lavender hidden in a pocket, a glove perfumed with musk left behind as a trace, a handkerchief scented with violets pressed into a palm. To carry a lover's perfume was to carry their presence. It was more intimate than jewelry, more secret than a letter. A fragrance could cling where words could not, lingering long after the moment had passed. In bedchambers, perfume softened linens. Rosewater sprinkled over sheets, lavender sachets tucked under pillows, violet powder dusted lightly across blankets. The air itself became part of intimacy. Lovers lay not only in each other's arms, but in a cloud of fragrance, sweetness mingling with breath and sighs. Perfume turned the private act into theater for two, invisible but unforgettable. But perfume also carried scandal. Heavy scents, civet, musk, ambergris, were linked to sensuality, sometimes even to immorality. A lady who wore too much civet was whispered about in salons, accused of indulgence or worse. A gentleman who favored musk might be admired for boldness or mocked for arrogance. The same perfume that whispered love in private could shout scandal in public. Whispers grew sharper in the affair of the poisons, when rumors of perfumed poisons spread through Paris. Suddenly, a vial of rosewater was not innocent. A sachet could be dangerous. Lovers feared that their perfumed gifts might conceal more than devotion. Trust was fragile, and fragrance, invisible as it was, carried suspicion as easily as sweetness. And yet, people still returned to perfume, unable to resist its intimacy. For what could be more alluring than a scent that clings to memory? Lovers understood that perfume outlasted moments. A whispered word fades, a kiss ends, but a fragrance lingers, haunting the pillow, the handkerchief, the room. Perfume became the ghost of intimacy, proof of what had been, promise of what might return. Writers of the time played with this. Poems described lovers scented with roses and jasmine, their fragrance mingling as they embraced. Satirists mocked nobles who masked affairs with perfume, claiming the sheets of Versailles smelled more of musk than of innocence. The double nature of perfume, pure or scandalous, intimate or excessive, made it irresistible for gossip and art alike. Picture, now, a quiet morning after such intimacy. The chamber is still, the fire burned down to ash. The sheets are rumpled, carrying the faint sweetness of rosewater and lavender. On the table, the vial of musk lies uncorked, a thin ribbon of scent drifting upward. The lover has gone, but their presence remains, invisible yet undeniable, breathed into the very air. Perfume carries memory, more faithful than words, more enduring than touch. And this, perhaps, was its greatest power in the boudoir, not just to enchant in the moment, but to linger beyond it, to leave traces, invisible fingerprints in the air, impossible to erase. A noblewoman might walk through Versailles later that day, and her gown would still carry last night's rosewater. A gentleman might enter the salon, and his gloves would still whisper musk. Perfume betrayed secrets as easily as it preserved them. This betrayal could fuel scandal. Rumors spread not only through words, but through scent. She smells of musk. Someone might whisper, she must be indulging. His gloves reek of civet. Another might sneer, too bold, too brazen. Perfume, invisible, became evidence, a sign as damning as it was alluring. And yet, beneath the gossip, the intimacy remained. Couples continued to exchange perfumed sachets. Sheets continued to be sprinkled with rose water. Lovers continued to perfume their letters with violet and musk. The risk only added to the thrill, making the air itself part of their secrecy. Perfume and intimacy was not only sensual, but soothing. A sachet under a pillow gave comfort as well as allure. A letter scented with lavender carried not only passion, but peace. Even scandalous perfumes softened into tenderness in the privacy of love. The contradictions of society faded in the quiet of the chamber, leaving only fragrance, memory, and breath. So as you rest here, imagine yourself in such a chamber. The fire low, the candle flickering, the sheets faintly perfumed with rose water. You lie back, the scent of lavender drifting from the pillow. In the silence, the perfume is more than fragrance. It is presence, intimacy, memory. You breathe slowly, and it feels as though someone you love has just whispered beside you. Perfume in the boudoir was never only scandal. It was comfort. It was intimacy. It was love, remembered through air. And as we pause at the close of this part, let us drift with that thought. That fragrance, invisible though it is, can carry intimacy longer than any word. Perfume was the secret language of the boudoir, whispered into air, carried into memory, lingering into dreams. In the next part, we will close our journey with the broader legacy of perfume in 17th century France, how it shaped culture, memory, and the centuries that followed, even as the air of Versailles grew still. Perfume, by the end of the 17th century, had woven itself so deeply into French life that it could no longer be seen as mere fashion or ornament. It had touched every corner. The grand spectacles of Versailles, the humble kitchens of villages, the solemn chapels of cathedrals, the intimate secrets of boudoirs. It had become part of the rhythm of life, as invisible as breath, as constant as memory. And yet, like breath, it was fleeting. A sachet lost its strength, incense smoke faded, rose water dried on skin. Perfume was a paradox, powerful enough to shape culture, yet fragile enough to vanish in an instant. Perhaps that is why it fascinated the people of the 17th century so deeply. They saw in perfume a reflection of themselves, strong in memory, yet brief in life. Louis XIV, the Sun King, carried this paradox in his very court. Versailles was drenched in fragrance, from fountains that misted rosewater to wigs powdered with violet. Guests walked through air that belonged to the king, perfumed as surely as the walls were gilded. And yet, the scent would fade when the candles dimmed. The perfumes of Versailles, like its festivals, were only temporary. What lingered was memory. Outside the palace, in villages and towns, perfume lingered in simpler ways. Lavender hung above beds, rosewater sprinkled on cakes, rosemary burned in hearths. These fragrances, too, faded with time, but they were remembered, carried in the hearts of those who lived them. A child grown old might still recall the scent of sugared violets at a festival or the rosemary crushed underfoot at a procession. Perfume also left its mark on art, poetry, and literature. Writers used roses to describe beauty, violets to describe devotion, musk to describe desire. Painters placed vials and flowers into still lives, symbols of both luxury and fragility. Satirists mocked perfume's excess, but in doing so admitted its dominance. Even when laughed at, fragrance was inescapable. And perhaps most of all, perfume lingered in intimacy. In sachets tucked into letters, in gloves perfumed for secret meetings, in sheets sprinkled with rose water. Perfume betrayed scandals, yes, but it also preserved love. It was both gossip and devotion, both scandal and comfort. The legacy of 17th century French perfume did not end with the century. Grasse, the region where jasmine and orange blossom were cultivated, grew into the perfume capital of the world. Recipes refined in the 1600s laid the groundwork for the perfume houses that flourished later. Even today, when we spray a perfume on our wrists, we are echoing rituals from those candlelit rooms, those sachet-filled drawers, those perfumed salons of Versailles. But beyond the history, perfume leaves something more intangible. The reminder that life is lived not only in words or deeds, but in breath, in scent, in invisible moments that shape memory. To smell is to remember. To perfume is to care. The people of 17th century France knew this well. Their perfumes may have faded, but their fragrant stories linger still. So as we bring this journey to a close, let us pause and inhale softly. Imagine roses blooming in the gardens of Versailles, lavender hung in a cottage window, frankincense rising in a cathedral, ambergris dissolved into chocolate, musk perfuming gloves, orange blossoms tucked into a bride's hair, civet whispered in a boudoir. Each scent a story, each breath a memory. Perfume was never only perfume. It was hope, love, devotion, power, scandal, comfort. It was France itself, in all its contradictions, grand and humble, sacred and profane, fleeting and eternal. And now, as you rest, let those perfumes drift softly into your dreams. Picture yourself walking slowly down a candlelit hall. Your footsteps are quiet, the air cool. Around you, faint traces of roses, violets, lavender, musk. They rise and fall with your breath, carrying you gently onward, until the past feels close enough to touch. You walk not through history, but through memory, guided by invisible threads of fragrance. And when you reach the end of the hall, you open the door, step inside, and find rest. The perfumes settle around you like a blanket, soft, soothing, sweet. They linger as you close your eyes, guiding you deeper into calm, deeper into dreams. Perfume was always fleeting, but in memory, in imagination, in this story, it lingers still. Good evening, dear friends, or perhaps, by now, good night. We've wandered together through the candlelit halls of Versailles, through kitchens scented with lavender, through churches where incense curled toward heaven, and into boudoirs where whispers lingered as long as perfume. We've followed fragrance through life, through joy, through scandal, and through memory itself. And now, as the story fades, let the perfumes of the past dissolve into dreams. The rosewater, the lavender, the musk, the ambergris, all drifting softly away, leaving only peace. If this gentle journey helped you unwind tonight, you're welcome to tap like or subscribe, only if it feels right for you. It's never a demand, just a quiet invitation, a way to keep wandering together on other nights. May the sweet sense of memory and history guide you into the calmest of sleep. May your dreams be light, fragrant, and kind. And if you drifted off along the way, let me know below. I'll take it as the highest compliment. For now, rest easy, sleep deeply, and know that you are safe. Sweet dreams, my friend. Boring history for sleep, signing off. Soft whisper, good night.